Hey guys, tonight we are going to drift away from the solid ground of our modern lives and set sail on the uncertain waters of the 18th century. Imagine yourself standing on a muddy, splintered dock in a bustling port. The air is thick with the smell of tar, salt, and something vaguely like spoiled cabbage. It's a symphony of distant sea shanties, the creaking groans of wooden hulls, and the squawk of gulls fighting over a discarded fish head. Frankly, based on the sanitation standards alone, you probably wouldn't survive the first week, let alone rise to become a feared buccaneer. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I always love to see where everyone is listening from, so feel free to post your city or country and the local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The choice isn't really a choice at all, is it? You stand here, a stone's throw from the chaotic energy of the wharf, and you weigh your options. Behind you lies the world you know. It's a world of cobbled streets slick with rain and refuse, of cramped rooms that smell of damp wool and coal smoke. It's a world where your entire future has been neatly and rather grimly mapped out for you by people other than yourself. Your father, a man whose affection is measured in practicality, has arranged a marriage. Your future husband is a cooper, a barrel maker, a man twice your age with hands permanently stained, and a sour breath that reaches you from across a room. He is considered a good match. He is steady. He does not drink too much. This, you are told, is the best you can hope for. Your other option is a life of servitude. Perhaps as a scullery maid in a great house, your hands raw and red from the constant plunge into greasy, scalding water. Or maybe in a laundry, the air thick with the caustic sting of lye soap, your back aching from dawn until dusk. These are the respectable paths. The life of a wife and mother, your identity legally submerged into your husband's, like a ship purposefully sunk in a shallow bay. Or the life of a worker, invisible and tired, earning just enough to eat your fill of watery gruel and sleep on a thin, straw mattress. There's not much room for dreams in either of these futures. They are safe, predictable, and soul-crushingly dull. Let's be honest, the most exciting part of your day is successfully avoiding the contents of a chamber pot being tossed from a second-story window. A real high-stakes game of chance. But then there's the third option. It's not a respectable one. It's not even a sane one, according to most. It's the whisper you hear in the taverns, the glint you see in the eyes of sailors with foreign coins in their pockets. It's the sea, and not just the merchant sea, which would be closed to you anyway, but the wild, lawless, and paradoxically free sea of the pirates. Down at the docks, the ships are a different world. They don't smell of bleak futures and arranged marriages. They smell of tar and hemp and gunpowder and distance. They smell of possibility. You understand the reality of it. You've heard the stories. Piracy is a life of violence, disease, and the constant looming threat of the hangman's noose, but it's also a life of choice. On a pirate ship, the crew signs articles, a code of conduct they agree to. They vote for their captain, they share the plunder. It's a brutal, bloody democracy, but a democracy nonetheless. A concept so alien to your current existence it might as well be from the moon. Historians still argue whether the choice for piracy was one of pure desperation, or if, for a select few, it represented a radical form of proto-feminist rebellion. For you, standing here with the damp chill seeping into your bones, it feels like both. It is a desperate act, born from a future that feels like a cage. But it is also the first real decision you might ever make for yourself. The men who swagger along these docks, they don't see you. You are part of the scenery, another woman of the port to be ignored or propositioned. You're not a threat. You're not a peer. And in that invisibility, you find a strange kind of power. The idea begins to form, not as a grand plan, but as a single terrifying step. What if you weren't a woman? Not forever, just for long enough. Long enough to trade your worn-out dress for a pair of rough-spun trousers and a loose shirt. Long enough to bind your chest, cut your hair, and lower your voice. Long enough to walk onto one of those ships, not as a woman seeking passage or protection, but as a boy seeking a fortune. It's a gamble of incredible odds. Discovery would mean something far worse than being thrown off the ship. Yet, as you watch a ship's crew preparing to catch the morning tide, the salty air feels less like a threat and more like a promise. Promise of a different kind of life. It won't be easy or clean or even long, but it would be yours. The decision once made sends a strange calm through you. The gnawing anxiety of your limited future is replaced by the sharp, electric fear of the present. This is better. Fear is a motivator. Despair was an anchor. You don't go back to the cramped room you call home. There's nothing for you there. Instead, you find a secluded, refuse-strewn alley between a chandlery and a bakery. The warm, yeasty smell from the bakery feels like a ghost from a life you've already left behind. Here, in the deepening twilight, the transformation begins. First, the hair. You've acquired a pair of rusty iron shears from an unattended market stall. The first cut is the hardest. It feels like severing a rope that tethers you to your old self. The long locks fall onto the grimy cobblestones, and with each snip, a weight lifts. Next is the most uncomfortable part of the charade. You take strips of linen, torn from a stolen bedsheet, and bind your chest as tightly as you can bear. It's restricting, painful even, making each breath a conscious effort. This, you realise, will be a constant hidden battle. The final piece is the clothing. A pair of rough canvas breeches and a loose-fitting linen shirt, borrowed from a washing line. They hang on your frame, awkward and foreign. You practice your walk, trying to replace the sway of a woman with the purposeful stride of a young man. You lower your voice, practicing a few gruff phrases, until they sound less like a parody and more like a habit. You're no longer Jane or Eleanor or whatever name you were given. You're now Jack. Simple, common, and forgettable. It's the perfect camouflage. Now comes the job interview. There is of course no formal application process, no pirate human resources department to review your qualifications, which, to be fair, are non-existent. You need to find a crew preparing to ship out. And for that, you must enter the one place that serves as the unofficial recruitment office for sailors of ill repute, the tavern. Not the cheerful pub near the main square, but a dimly lit, low-ceilinged establishment on the waterfront with a name like the Drowned Rat or the Anchor and Chain. The kind of place where the floor is sticky with spilled rum and sawdust of a questionable origin. You push open the heavy wooden door, and a wall of noise, heat and smell hits you. It's the scent of wet wool, cheap tobacco and unwashed men. You keep your head down, your new shorter hair tucked under a worn cap. Your eyes scan the room. Historians debate how common it actually was for pirates to recruit in bustling public taverns versus seeking out disgruntled sailors on the verge of mutiny. But tonight it seems the stories are true. You ignore the loud merchant seamen and the stony-faced Royal Navy men trying to press drunks into service. You're looking for a different energy, and you find it in a dark corner. A group of men, armed and at ease, their clothes a patchwork of different styles and origins, a telltale sign of a crew that acquires its wardrobe from multiple sources. They aren't loud or boisterous. They are watchful, their laughter low and guttural. Presiding over them is a man with a web of scars across one side of his face, his eyes missing nothing. He looks like the man in charge of hard decisions. This is it. You take a breath, feeling the binding dig into your ribs, and walk over. Every step is a performance. You try to project a confidence you absolutely do not feel. Heard you might be signing on hands, you say, your practiced low voice sounding thin in the din. The chatter at the table stops. 6 pairs of eyes turn to you, this skinny, rain-dampened youth who has just interrupted them. The silence stretches thick and heavy. The scarred man looks you up and down, a slow dismissive appraisal. "And what good would a slip of a lad like you be on the account?" he asks, his voice a low rumble. He gestures to your hands. "Let's see 'em." You hold them out, palms up. He grabs one, his grip like iron. He turns it over, his thumb rubbing roughly against your palm, feeling for the hardened calluses of a labourer or a sailor. Thankfully, your life of menial work has provided just enough evidence. It's not the hand of a seasoned mariner, but it's not the soft hand of a gentleman either. "Run away," he grunts. You nod, feeding him the story you rehearsed. A cruel apprenticeship with a blacksmith. A lie, but a plausible one. He lets go of your hand. Know the pointy end of a cutlass from the handle? A bit of a trick question. You reply simply, "You show me which end to use, I'll use it." A flicker of something, not quite amusement, passes over his face. This isn't about your skill. It's about your willingness. Are you desperate enough to be useful? Are you foolish enough to be brave? They don't need an expert. They need a body. One more hand to haul a rope, scrub a deck, or absorb a musket ball. It's a grim calculus. He stares at you for a moment longer, then gives a short, almost imperceptible nod to the man beside him. The longboat leaves from King's Quay at high tide. Don't be late." And just like that, the interview is over. The men turn back to their drinks, the conversation resuming as if you were never there. You've been accepted. The relief is so intense it makes you dizzy, but it's chased by a cold wave of terror. You did it. You're one of them. Now the real test begins. You back away from the table, turn and walk out of the tavern, leaving the noise and the smoke behind. The cool night air feels clean and fresh. You're no longer a woman with no future. You're a boy with a very, very dangerous one. You make your way through the darkened streets to King's Quay. The moon is hidden by a thick blanket of clouds, which feels like a blessing. Invisibility is your only armour right now. As promised, a longboat is waiting. A few silent figures already seated within. A man holding a lantern aloft simply jerks his head, and you climb in, trying not to stumble. The short journey across the harbour is almost silent, punctuated only by the rhythmic splash of oars in the black water. Then she emerges from the gloom, the pirate ship. Let's call her the Sea Serpent. She's not the grand, glorious vessel of seafaring legends. She's a working beast, scarred and practical, her silhouette dark and menacing against the faint glow of the distant town. Climbing the rope ladder up the side of the hull is your first test. It's awkward and terrifying. The boat shifts beneath you, and your muscles, unaccustomed to such a task, scream in protest. Halfway up, your foot slips, and for a heart-stopping moment you dangle, before a rough hand grabs the collar of your shirt and hauls you unceremoniously onto the deck. Your arrival is met with a low chuckle from the man who helped you. "Got the sea legs of a newborn calf, eh, lad?" he grunts, before turning away. There is no formal welcome. You are simply here now, another piece of human cargo. You're pointed below deck to stow your non-existent gear and claim a place to sleep. If the deck was organised chaos, the sleeping quarters are a masterclass in compressed living. The ceiling is so low you can't fully stand up, and the air is a thick, soupy mixture of stale rum, sweat, bilge water, and a faint, ever-present hint of mildew. Dozens of hammocks are strung up, crammed so close together they look like a giant stringed instrument. It smells like the inside of a sock that's been worn for a week. You find an empty space between a barrel of salted fish and a man who is snoring with the force of a small thunderstorm. An older pirate, seeing you struggle, wordlessly shows you the correct knots to sling your hammock. It's a small, gruff kindness in a world you expected to be entirely brutal. The daily routine of maintaining your disguise begins immediately, and it is exhausting. The most glaring and immediate problem is the complete and utter lack of privacy. There are no rooms, no cubicles, no doors to close. Your entire world is this shared space. This becomes terrifyingly clear when you first need to use the privy. You learn it's called the head, which refers to the very front of the ship, the bow. There, a simple wooden grating or a board extends out over the water. That's it. You're expected to perch there in full view of anyone else on deck and attend to your business. It is, without a doubt, the most public-private moment imaginable, a level of communal living that tests your nerve far more than any threat of violence. Historians can only speculate on the precise methods women like Anne Bonny and Mary Read used to avoid discovery in such close quarters, suggesting a mixture of luck, cunning, and perhaps the crew's own quiet determination not to notice anything that might complicate their share of the plunder. You learn to become a ghost in plain sight. You speak only when spoken to. You mimic the rough language and casual posture of the men around you. You do your work, the dirtiest and most grueling jobs assigned to the new boy, with a quiet efficiency that draws no attention. Your greatest ally, you discover, is the crew's profound lack of interest in personal hygiene. In a world where everyone is grimy and smells faintly of the sea, your own guarded cleanliness goes completely unnoticed. Just before dawn, a new energy buzzes through the ship. The anchor is weighed, the capstan groaning as the men push against its bars. Shouted orders echo in the crisp air as the vast sails are unfurled, catching the morning breeze with a satisfying snap. You are put to work on a rope, pulling alongside a dozen other men, your hands already raw, your muscles burning. But as the Sea Serpent begins to move, gliding out of the harbour and towards the open sea, you feel a surge of something powerful. The port, with its suffocating certainty and grim future, shrinks behind you, a fading smudge on the horizon. There is no turning back now. You're at sea, a boy named Jack, and every sunrise is a victory. The romance of the open sea lasts for approximately 5 minutes. As the sun climbs higher, casting a brilliant shimmering path across the water, the reality of your new career sets in. There is no training manual, no gentle orientation day. Your education comes in the form of shouted orders from the ship's boatswain or bosun, a man whose neck is as thick as your thigh and whose vocabulary seems to consist mainly of your new name, Jack, and various creative curses. You learn very quickly that a pirate ship is less a den of roguish leisure and more a floating high-stakes factory where every worker is expected to pull their weight, and then some. Your first and most frequent duty is a testament to your lowly status. You get to know the deck intimately. You're handed a heavy mop or swab and a wooden bucket, and you begin the endless task of washing the planks. It's not about cleanliness in the way you once knew it. It's a constant war against the corrosive salt of the sea spray, which eats away at wood, rope and sailcloth. The work is monotonous, your world shrinking to the few square feet of wet wood in front of you. The scenic view is spectacular if you enjoy looking at splinters and the occasional beetle scurrying for cover. Back and forth you go, the rhythmic sloshing of the water in the bucket becoming a part of the ship's percussive soundtrack. When you are not swabbing, you're introduced to an even more backbreaking task known as holy stoning. You are given a large, flat block of sandstone nicknamed a Bible and told to get on your knees. Your job is to push and pull this heavy stone across the wooden deck to scrub it smooth and white. It is a grueling, mind-numbing activity that feels suspiciously like a form of penance. The scraping sound of the stone on the wood, the burning in your knees and shoulders, the slow inch-by-inch progress, it's a powerful lesson in humility. The older sailors seem to enjoy watching the new recruits suffer through it, perhaps remembering their own first weeks at sea. Then there is the great terrifying mystery of the rigging. You look up and see a dense, bewildering forest of ropes, lines and cables, a web of hemp and tar that controls the ship's massive sails. To you, they all look the same. To a seasoned sailor, each one has a specific name and a vital purpose. The bosun points and yells, "Ease the main topsail brail," or "Haul on the fore halyard," and you're expected to know which of the 100 identical-looking ropes he means. In those first few days, you learn by watching others, your eyes darting around frantically to see which line the real sailors are grabbing. Getting it wrong earns you a sharp cuff to the back of the head and a stream of insults. Scholars sometimes debate whether pirate crews, often assembled hastily, prioritise skilled mariners or simply warm bodies capable of pulling a rope. You get the distinct impression this crew falls somewhere in the middle. They'll take anyone, but they expect you to learn fast or suffer the consequences. Your body, so accustomed to the routines of life on land, protests loudly. The soft skin of your hands, which you thought was tough, quickly blisters, then breaks, then bleeds. You learn to work through the pain and slowly, agonizingly, true calluses begin to form. A deep, permanent ache settles into your back and shoulders. At the end of your watch, you don't just walk to your hammock, you stumble, every muscle screaming. The profound exhaustion is, in a strange way, a benefit to your disguise. You're too tired to be nervous, too sore to be anything but the weary, hard-working boy you appear to be. Your day is broken up by your watch, a 4-hour shift of vigilance. As a novice, you are not yet trusted with the crow's nest. Instead, you are placed on the forecastle, at the very bow of the ship, tasked with staring out at the horizon. It's the first time the job is not purely physical. For long stretches, there is nothing but the vast, empty expanse of the sea and sky. The rhythmic rise and fall of the ship, the endless whisper of the wind through the rigging, the creak and groan of the ship's timbers. It's hypnotic. It is here, staring into the blue infinity, that you feel the first tiny flicker of what drew you to this life, a sense of boundless, terrifying freedom. One evening, as you're coiling a rope, the bosun barks, "Jack, furl the jib sheet." Without thinking, your hands, now moving with a nascent memory of their own, go to the correct line and begin the task. He watches you for a moment, then grunts, a sound devoid of praise, but more importantly, devoid of criticism. It's the first time you've done something unquestionably right. You fall into your hammock that night, not just as a survivor, but as a sailor, a very, very tired one. Several weeks have passed since you were hauled aboard the Sea Serpent. The raw blisters on your hands have hardened into the promised calluses, and the geography of the ship's rigging is no longer a complete and terrifying enigma. You have fallen into the rhythm of the work, a grueling but predictable dance of hauling, scrubbing, and watching. You're just beginning to feel a sense of anonymous belonging when the routine is broken. The call goes out from the boatswain for all hands to muster on the main deck. It's not a call to action or a drill. There's a solemnity to it that quiets the usual chatter. The crew gathers, finding places to lean against the masts and rails. The air feels still and expectant. The captain, a man you've seen mostly from a distance, is there, but he stands quietly aside. It is the quartermaster, the man with the scarred face who first sized you up in that grimy tavern, who steps into the centre of the deck. In his hands he holds a roll of parchment, yellowed and stained with seawater. He unrolls it with a practised motion. This, you realise, is a ceremony, an initiation. The quartermaster begins to read, his voice cutting clearly through the air. These are the ship's articles of agreement. The pirate's key, this is the law. You listen, captivated. You had expected a life of pure chaotic anarchy, but what you hear is a blueprint for a surprisingly orderly society. The first article he reads makes you blink in disbelief. Every man shall have an equal vote in affairs of moment. One man, one vote. The right to elect and depose your own captain. In the world you came from, such a concept was unthinkable, an act of treason. Here, it is the first and most sacred law. It's a brutal meritocracy. He continues down the list. No man shall game at cards or dice for money. A sensible rule, you suppose, to prevent the kind of desperate gambling that leads to fights. Lights and candles to be put out at 8 o'clock at night, he reads, and you have to suppress a smile. It sounds less like a pirate rule and more like something your own mother would have enforced. The quartermaster explains it's to ensure everyone is rested for their watch and, more importantly, to prevent a catastrophic fire on a wooden ship full of gunpowder. It's also practical. Historians debate whether these articles were wholly original pirate inventions or if they were adapted from the structured communal laws of earlier privateers and buccaneers. Listening to these rules, you suspect the pirates simply perfected a system born from hard-won experience. Then comes the part that truly defines the enterprise. A clear, unambiguous pay scale. The captain and quartermaster to receive 2 shares of a prize, the master, boatswain, and the gunner, 1 share and a half, and other officers 1 1/4. You, as an ordinary seaman, are entitled to 1 full share. No hidden fees, no deductions for room and board. It's the most transparent compensation plan you've ever heard of. This is followed by the workplace injury policy, a grim but detailed list of payments for crippling injuries sustained in the line of duty. For the loss of a right arm, 600 pieces of 8. For the loss of a left arm, 500 pieces of 8. For a right leg, 500. For a left leg, 400. For an eye, 100 pieces of 8. It's a strange and unsettling comfort to know your component parts have a fixed market value. The quartermaster's voice drones on, and then he reads a line that sends a jolt of ice through your veins. No boy or woman to be allowed amongst us. If any man shall be found seducing any of the latter sex, and carrying her to sea disguised, he is to suffer death. You freeze. Your blood runs cold. You dare not even blink. You fix your gaze on a point on the far horizon, forcing your face into a mask of blank indifference, praying that no one is looking at you, this beardless boy who suddenly feels dangerously conspicuous. It's the ultimate irony. The one law that could undo you completely is read aloud as you are being sworn into the Brotherhood. Finally, the reading is done. A heavy leather-bound book and an inkpot are produced. Step forward and make your mark, the quartermaster commands. One by one, the sailors move forward to sign their names, or, for those who cannot write, to draw a simple X beside their printed name. It feels like you're agreeing to the terms and conditions on a particularly volatile piece of software. Then he calls your new name. Jack. You walk forward on legs that feel strangely disconnected from your body. You take the offered quill, dip it in the pot of black ink, and in the book, next to your name, you sign. The single word looks foreign, powerful. With that stroke of ink, your old life is gone. You are no longer just hiding on a pirate ship, you're bound to it. You step back into the crowd, your heart hammering against your ribs. You are, for better or for worse, a pirate now. Now that you are bound by the ship's articles, a new, more subtle pressure begins to build. It's no longer enough to simply survive the day's work without being discovered. You are now entitled to a full share of any plunder, and with that right comes the heavy responsibility of proving you are worth it. You look at the men around you, grizzled, hardened sailors with years of experience and muscles like coiled rope. You know with absolute certainty that you will never compete with them in brute strength. Trying to would only highlight your weaknesses, so you must find a different currency. You must cultivate a value that is uniquely yours. Your greatest asset, born from the constant fear of discovery, is your power of observation. While the other pirates swagger and shout, their attention focused on the obvious, you have learned to live in the details. You're always watching, always listening. This constant vigilance transforms you from a frightened runaway into the ship's unofficial early warning system. You notice the subtle change in the colour of the sea that hints at a coming squall. You spot the first tiny signs of wear on a crucial piece of rigging that the boatswain has overlooked. You learn to read the moods of the crew, to sense a simmering dispute before it boils over into a brawl. The other men see a ship, you see a complex, living organism, and you are learning its secret language. Your next hidden value comes from a skill you brought with you from your old life. A skill considered so mundane here it is practically invisible. The ability to mend things properly. One evening, by the dim light of a rationed candle, you painstakingly repair a tear in your own canvas shirt, using a small needle and thread you've kept hidden. A fellow pirate, watching you, scoffs. His method of repair involves either tying a knot in the torn fabric or ignoring it entirely. But a few days later, the quartermaster, whose eye for detail you are coming to respect, leaves a small pile of ripped canvas supply bags near your hammock. There's no order given, no word spoken, but the message is clear. You do the work, your stitch is neat and strong. Soon you are the one quietly sought out to repair a torn sail, reinforce a flag, or even patch the captain's leather waistcoat. It's a quiet, almost domestic skill, yet on a ship where everything is subject to relentless wear and tear, it is a form of magic. And then there is the superpower you possess that perhaps only 2 or 3 other men on board can claim. Literacy. For weeks you keep it hidden, another secret in your arsenal. The opportunity to reveal it comes after the sea serpent takes its first small prize, a merchant brigantine. The captain and quartermaster are in the captain's cabin, struggling to make sense of the captured ship's logbook. You hear their frustrated curses. Taking a monumental risk, so you step forward and in your quietest Jack voice, you offer to read it for them. They look at you, this scrawny, silent boy, with suspicion, then with grudging curiosity. You take the book and read the entries aloud, cargo manifests, recent ports of call, weather observations. Suddenly a new role is created for you. You become the keeper of inventories, the interpreter of maps, the one who can distinguish a valuable document from a worthless one. You are the unpaid, unofficial ship's clerk, a position that gives you a level of access and influence you never could have earned with a cutlass. While legends of female pirates like Anne Bonny and Mary Read focus on their ferocity in battle, historians speculate about their daily contributions, suggesting they may have been valued for their intelligence and steady hands in tasks the other pirates disdained. You begin to understand this firsthand. Your smaller build, once a source of anxiety, means you are the one chosen for tasks requiring agility. You are sent scrambling up the shrouds to untangle a fouled line, or asked to squeeze into the tight confines of the cargo hold to inspect the stores. You're not as strong, but you're quicker, and in some situations that is far more valuable. You're carving out a niche, not as a warrior, but as a specialist. You're Jack the Observer, Jack the Mender, Jack the Reader. You're becoming essential. The crew may not know why they are starting to rely on you, but they are, and that is a powerful shield. As you lie in your hammock, the familiar sounds of the sleeping ship around you, you reflect on this strange turn. Your secret identity, the source of your greatest fear, has forced you to become a better, more valuable pirate than you ever could have been otherwise. The ship settles into the long, slow rhythm of a multi-week voyage. The days are filled with the familiar routines of work and watch, but the nights are different. When the sea is calm and the wind is steady, a kind of temporary peace descends. It is on one such night, as you sit mending a sail under the dim glow of a lantern, that one of the older pirates, a man with a face like a weathered map named Silas, begins to tell a story. He's noticed your quiet diligence, your separation from the rougher play of the crew. He likely sees you as a lonely boy, far from home. "You think this life is strange, lad?" he says. His voice a low rasp. "It's nothing compared to the path that led some of the great ones to it. Let me tell you about Anne Bonny." You listen, needle still in hand, as his story begins, and it doesn't start in a filthy port town or on the deck of a pirate ship. starts in comfort, in County Cork, Ireland, in the house of a successful lawyer named William Cormac. Her beginnings were a quiet scandal. She was the illegitimate daughter of Cormac and his serving maid, a woman named Mary Brennan. To avoid social ruin, Cormac did something remarkably bold and strange. He brought the young girl to live in his home, but disguised her as a boy named Andy, telling his wife and colleagues that this was the son of a friend he was training as a law clerk. As Silas tells this part of the story, you have to force yourself to keep stitching, to not let your surprise show on your face. A girl disguised as a boy to survive in a world not made for her. The parallel is so sharp, so specific, it sends a shiver down your spine. The ruse, of course, did not last. The truth eventually came out, and the resulting scandal shattered Cormac's career and life in Ireland. So he did what many did when their old world fell apart. He ran to the new one. Taking Mary and young Anne with him, he left everything behind and sailed for America. After a brief, difficult time in London, they landed in Charlestown in the colony of Carolina. And here, William Cormac, a man of clear ambition, reinvented himself. He shed his scandalous past, entered into trade, and eventually purchased a large plantation. The family that had fled in disgrace became wealthy, respected members of the colonial elite. Anne Bonny did not grow up in poverty, scraping for every meal. She grew up a lady of privilege, but she was not, it seems, suited for the role. The legends that swirled around her later in life always painted her as a wild, rebellious child. As Silas speaks, he lowers his voice as if sharing a grand secret. They say she had a temper like a flash of gunpowder, that when she was just 13 she took a kitchen knife and stabbed a servant girl in the belly. He pauses, letting the image hang in the air. Historians, the bookish types, caution that these tales might be exaggerated embellishments, designed to make her later life of piracy seem more inevitable. But even if they're half true, she was no wilting flower. She was expected to learn needlepoint and conversation, to be a demure southern belle who would secure a powerful marriage. Instead, she was strong-willed, outspoken, and by all accounts, utterly untamable. Her father, for all his own unconventional history, expected her to follow the path he had laid out. He arranged a good match for her, a marriage that would have consolidated the family's wealth and status. Anne would have none of it. In her final, definitive act of rebellion against the life of pampered luxury she was meant to lead, she threw it all away. She fell for, and secretly married, a man her father despised. A handsome, charming, and entirely useless sailor named James Bonny. As Silas describes him, you can't help but think it's the classic 18th century equivalent of bringing home a broke musician to infuriate your rich dad. The reaction was swift and absolute. William Cormac, the man who had once disguised her as a boy and crossed an ocean for her, now disowned her completely. She was cut off without a penny. Suddenly, the wealthy heiress was just a sailor's wife with no prospects and no home, so she and her new feckless husband did the only thing they could. They packed their meagre belongings and headed for the one place in the new world where a person's past didn't matter, and a fortune could be made or lost over the night, the pirate haven of Nassau on the island of New Providence. Silas stops there, looking out at the dark, endlessly rolling waves. The ship creaks gently beneath you, a soft, rhythmic lullaby. The story of Anne Bonny, a woman of privilege who chose poverty, a lady who chose chaos, a girl once disguised as a boy, hangs in the salty air. And that, Silas says, with a hint of a smile, is where her story gets interesting. Silas, the old pirate storyteller, lets the name of Anne Bonny hang in the night air for a moment before taking a long, slow draw from his clay pipe. The cherry glows a dull red, briefly illuminating the deep lines on his face. But Bonny's not the only one, he says, his voice dropping again to its storytelling rasp. Her story is one of fire, a rebellion against a life of comfort. The other one, her story is one of quiet necessity, a life built on a secret from the very beginning. Her name was Mary Read. He looks at you, this boy called Jack, and you feel a strange sense that he's talking as much to you as he is to the open sea. Mary Read's story, he begins, starts not with a choice but with a deception, a long con that would make most of the men on this ship blush. She was born in England in secret to the widow of a sea captain. Her mother already had a son named Mark, but shortly after her husband was lost at sea, the young Mark died as well. This was a catastrophe, not just emotionally but financially. The boy's paternal grandmother was wealthy and had been providing financial support for Mark. With him gone, that money would disappear. So Mary's mother concocted a desperate, brilliant plan. When the time came to visit the grandmother, she dressed her newborn daughter Mary in boy's clothes and presented her as Mark. The deception worked. The money kept coming. And so Mary Red's entire childhood was a performance. Unlike Anne Bonny, who was disguised for a short time for her father's convenience, Mary knew no other life. She was raised as her deceased brother. She was, for all the world knew, Mark Reed. She learned to walk like a boy, talk like a boy, and fight like a boy. She had no choice in the matter. It was the price of her family's survival. It's a subject of debate among historians as whether Mary resented this forced identity, or eventually embraced the freedoms it unknowingly provided her. In an age where a girl's life was one of domestic confinement, Mark Reed could go where he pleased. He had a liberty that Mary Reed never would have known. As a teenager, Mark had to find a trade. The financial support from the grandmother couldn't last forever. For a young man with few connections and a need to prove his masculinity, there was one obvious time-honoured career path: the army. So Mark Red enlisted in the British military. She was sent to Flanders to fight in the brutal, endless wars there. And she was, by all accounts, a very good soldier. She was competent, brave, and disciplined. The disguise that had been forced upon her had become a perfect hardened shell. She fit right in. But then, as it so often does, life became complicated. Mary, living every day as a man, did something her male persona couldn't account for. She fell in love. He was another soldier in her regiment, a handsome Flemish man. For the first time, her disguise was not a tool for survival, but a barrier to her own happiness. She was faced with an impossible choice: maintain the lie and lose the man she loved, or reveal the truth and risk everything. She chose the truth. In a moment of incredible bravery, she took her fellow soldier aside and revealed her secret. To her immense relief, he was not horrified. He was, it seems, just as smitten with her as she was with him. They decided to leave the war behind. They pooled their military pay, got married, and for a short, beautiful time they found peace. They opened a small inn near the castle of Breda in the Netherlands, an establishment called the Three Horseshoes. For a brief moment, Mary Red got to live as Mary. She was a wife, an innkeeper. She had a normal life, a future free of secrets and fighting. It was a gentle, quiet existence that she had more than earned. But fate, Silas says with a sigh, is a cruel mistress. The peaceful interlude was tragically short. Her young husband fell ill and died suddenly. Without him, Mary couldn't manage the inn on her own. The business failed, and she was left a widow, penniless and alone in a foreign land. She had no family to turn to, no prospects as a woman with no fortune. So she did the only thing she knew how to do to survive. She cut her hair, put on the familiar soldier's uniform, and once again became Mark Reed. She re-enlisted, but this time her regiment was bound for the West Indies. As she boarded that ship, she wasn't seeking adventure or fortune. She was just a person trying to endure, a survivor being pushed by the currents of fate. While Anne Bonny was actively sailing toward a life of piracy in Nassau, Mary Reed was being carried there by tragedy, one wave at a time. The old pirate Silas knocks the spent ash from his pipe against the ship's rail, the faint embers dying as they hit the damp air. So, you have two women, he says, his voice a low murmur against the rhythmic creaking of the ship. Both forged in deception, both now adrift in the West Indies. One running from a life of privilege, the other from a life of poverty. Their paths were always going to cross. It was just a matter of where. He gestures vaguely towards the dark horizon, and the place where all lost things eventually wash ashore was the pirate republic of Nassau. He describes the Nassau that Anne Bonny would have found. Not a city, really, but a sprawling, chaotic shantytown built on plunder and rum. A temporary paradise for sailors, thieves, and anyone else running from the law. Here, Anne, having quickly grown tired of her feckless husband James, found herself drawn to a man who was the very picture of a pirate captain, John Rackham. He wasn't the most fearsome or the most successful pirate of the age, Silas chuckles, but he was by far the best dressed. They called him Calico Jack, on account of his love for bright Indian calico shirts and breeches. His fashion sense was probably his most dangerous quality. Anne, with her fiery red hair and equally fiery spirit, and Calico Jack, with his flamboyant style, became the celebrity couple of this lawless town. But the good times were ending. A new governor, Woodes Rogers, arrived with a mission to clean up the island, offering pardons to any pirate who would renounce their trade. Jack took the pardon for a time, but the quiet life didn't suit him or Anne, so one night they gathered a small crew, stole a fast sloop named the Revenge right out of the harbour, and slipped away to sea back on the account. Anne Bonny was now officially a pirate, living openly as a woman among a dozen or so men on a small cramped ship. Historians debate how much Anne participated in active piracy at this stage. Was she merely the captain's consort, a pretty distraction, or had she already proven herself a capable fighter in her own right? Silas seems to think she was learning, watching, waiting for her moment. Now, he weaves the second thread back into the tale. At this very same time, the ship carrying Mark Reed is making its way through these pirate-infested waters. For Mary, this was just another tedious military transport. For the crew of the Revenge, it was a target. The attack was swift. The merchant vessel, hopelessly outgunned, surrendered quickly. The pirates swarmed aboard and the recruitment process began. It was a simple, effective method. Your ship has been captured. Congratulations on your new job. Any man with sailing skills was given the choice to join the crew or be left on the nearest deserted island. For Mary, still living as Mark read, it wasn't a choice at all. To survive, she agreed to sign their articles. She was now a pirate. And so the stage was set for one of the strangest situations in naval history. Mary Reid, disguised as a quiet and competent English sailor named Mark, was now a crewman on the Revenge, a small ship captained by a fop, whose lover was the famously female Anne Bonny. The sloop was a terrible place to keep a secret. It was a fraction of the size of your current vessel, the Sea Serpent. There was no corner to hide in, no moment of guaranteed privacy. Every day was a high-wire act for Mary. She worked alongside the other men, ate with them, slept inches from them, all while under the curious eye of the one person on board who might understand her better than anyone, if only she knew the truth. Life on the Revenge settled into a rhythm. Calico Jack was not a grand strategist. He preferred to prey on small, poorly defended fishing vessels and trading sloops. It was not a glorious life, but it was a living. Mark Reed quickly earned a reputation as a capable, if quiet, sailor. Not given to the loud boasts and drunken arguments of the others, he did his work well and kept to himself. This, of course, only made him more intriguing. Anne Bonny, in particular, found herself watching this handsome, reserved young Englishman. He was different from the other brutes in her crew. He had a gentleness, a quiet competence that she found herself drawn to. The fuse on this powder keg of secrets had been lit. "Imagine it," Silas whispers, the story now a confidential murmur. The flamboyant captain, his fiery lover, and the quiet soldier with the impossible secret, all trapped together on a tiny ship, sailing under the hot Caribbean sun. A more dangerous cocktail you could not imagine. Silas leans in a little closer, the lantern light casting long, dancing shadows. His voice drops to a conspiratorial whisper, as if he's sharing the most crucial part of the secret. "A ship is a small power," he repeats softly, "a terrible place for secrets." And on the Revenge, 3 enormous secrets were now sharing the same cramped space. Anne's past, Mary's gender, and the growing affection between the two of them. The other sailors around you have long since drifted off to their hammocks, but you remain caught in the old pirate's spell. As the days turned into weeks, Anne Bonny found herself spending more and more time with the quiet English sailor, Mark Reid. She was drawn to his gentle nature and sharp mind, a stark contrast to the boorish grunting of the rest of the crew. They would share the night watch, their low voices a quiet murmur under the vast, starry sky. To the other pirates, it was an odd but harmless friendship. To Calico Jack, it was a betrayal. He saw his fiery lover, the prize he had flaunted in the face of Nassau's governor, giving her time and her smiles to this boy. And his vanity, a thing more fragile than any ship's mast in a storm, began to crack. Like in any great story, Silas notes with a wry smile, the plot was pushed forward by a fragile male ego. Jack's jealousy festered, fueled by rum and suspicion. He began making threats, at first drunkenly to the crew and then to Ban. He swore he'd slit the pretty boy's throat while he slept. The situation was becoming untenable. Anne, who had never shied away from a confrontation in her life, decided to face the problem head-on. She wasn't about to let Jack's temper dictate who she could speak to. She found Mary alone on deck one evening, ostensibly mending a fishing net. In the secluded shadow of the mainsail, away from prying eyes, Anne got straight to the point. She told Mary that the captain was mad with jealousy and that her life was in genuine danger. Then, in a gesture of ultimate trust, and perhaps as a way to explain her own unusual position, Anne looked the young sailor in the eye and said, "You should know that I am not what I seem. I am a woman." Of course, this was hardly news to Mary, who had been acutely aware of this fact from the moment she boarded the ship. But she had to feign surprise, her mind racing. This was the moment of truth. Trapped between a jealous captain who wanted to murder her and the captain's lover who had just confided in her, Mary saw that her own secret was no longer sustainable. It was a terrifying gamble, but trusting Anne felt like the only move left on the board. She swore Anne to a solemn oath of secrecy. Then, with her heart hammering against the tight linen bindings on her chest, she opened her shirt. The reveal was met not with a gasp, but with a stunned, silent recognition. It must have been the most confusing and profoundly relieving conversation of their lives. Two women, disguised in different ways, who believed they were utterly alone in the world, had found each other in the most unlikely of places. The precise nature of their bond, whether it was the deep, immediate friendship of shared experience, a romantic attachment, or simply a strategic alliance for survival, is a topic of endless fascination and debate for historians. Silas suggests it was probably all three. In that moment they became a unit, a secret alliance of two. They were no longer just women surviving in a man's world, they were partners. But first they had to deal with the captain. To save Mary's life, they had to let Jack in on the secret. Together they confronted him. You can just imagine his face as Anne explained that the reason she was so fond of Mark Reed was not one of romance, but of kinship. For Mark was a woman too. Calico Jack's murderous rage likely sputtered out into sheer, dumbfounded disbelief. His mind, so fixated on a simple love triangle, could barely process this new information. Once the shock wore off, his pragmatism took over. He was a captain who now had not one but two capable hands who had proven themselves in a fight, regardless of what they wore beneath their shirts. He agreed to the secret. Mary Red could remain, her identity known only to the three of them. Silas leans back, the story for the night concluded. The Revenge sails on into the darkness, its internal dynamics forever changed. It is now a ship run by a trinity, the flashy captain, his fierce lover, and his lover's secret female companion. Things, Silas says, a sleepy smile touching his lips, were about to get a lot more interesting. Silas's stories of Anne and Mary have become part of the ship's lore, tales told on long, quiet watches. But now the time for stories is over. You've been at sea for months, and the ship's stores of food and fresh water are running low. The mood on the Sea Serpent has shifted from one of lazy passage to a quiet, hungry vigilance. You are no longer just sailing, you are hunting. And then, one bright, clear afternoon it comes, the call from the lookout in the crow's nest, sharp and clear. Sail ho! Instantly the atmosphere on the deck changes. The lazy rhythm is broken. Men who are napping in the sun are on their feet. There's no shouting, no panic. Instead, a quiet, focused energy ripples through the crew. The quartermaster gives a series of low commands, and you and the others move to your stations. You are no longer just Jack the Mender or the Reader. You are Jack the Crewman, and you have a job to do. Your heart thumps a little faster, but your hands, now calloused and sure, know which ropes to tend to. You learn now that piracy is not a mad, chaotic dash at every ship you see. It is a science of calculated risk. The captain and quartermaster stand on the quarterdeck sharing a long, brass spyglass. They study the distant vessel for a long time. You hear them discussing it. What flag does she fly? How many gun ports can they see? Is she a nimble sloop or a heavy, wallowing merchant ship? Most importantly, how low does she ride in the water? A ship riding low is a ship heavy with cargo, and a ship heavy with cargo is slow and valuable. A ship riding high is likely carrying little of worth, or worse, is a naval vessel cleared for action, carrying a belly full of cannonballs and trained marines. In that case, the only strategy is to turn tail and run. Very, very fast. The target today is deemed acceptable. A lumbering merchant brigantine, flying Spanish colours, sitting low in the water. a plum ripe for the picking. But still, the attack is not immediate. You spend the next few hours shadowing her, keeping just over the horizon, a patient predator. The helmsman makes minute adjustments to the course, using the wind to gain a strategic advantage. It's a slow, tense dance. The goal is to approach from a direction that surprises them, closing the distance before they have time to prepare a meaningful defence. As dusk begins to settle, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and purple, the order is given to close the gap. The sea serpent cuts through the waves, faster and more agile than the merchant ship. You are still flying a friendly English flag, a common ruse to allow you to get close without causing alarm. Then comes the moment of theatre. The English flag is lowered. For a few dramatic seconds there is no flag at all. Then a new one is hoisted up the mast. A simple black banner with the stark white image of a skull and crossbones. It is the Jolly Roger. You learn in this moment that the flag itself is the primary weapon. It is a piece of psychological warfare, a brand identity that communicates a very clear message across the water. We are pirates. Surrender now, and we may spare your lives. Resist, and we will grant no quarter. The next step is the punctuation to this statement. The ship's gunner is ordered to fire a single warning shot. There is a deafening boom that echoes across the water, and a cannonball skips across the waves, deliberately missing the brigantine's bow by 100 feet. It's a question, not an attack. The question is, have you understood our message? Historians often debate whether the primary pirate strategy was driven by bloodlust or by a form of brutal pragmatism, a business model where violence was a tool but not the goal itself. From what you see, it's clearly the latter. A real fight would damage the prize, punch holes in the hull and risk the lives of the crew, your crew. The goal is to get the goods with the least amount of fuss, a philosophy you're beginning to admire. A tense silence follows the warning shot. All eyes on the sea serpent are fixed on the Spanish vessel. For a long minute, nothing happens. Then slowly, you see their flag, the flag of Spain, begin to slide down its mast. They have struck their colours. They are surrendering. A quiet, collective sigh of relief ripples through your crew. The battle is over before it even began. It was less a swashbuckling fight and more a hostile corporate takeover. As your ship manoeuvres alongside the captured brigantine, grappling hooks at the ready, you feel a strange mix of adrenaline and relief. The calculated risk has paid off, the theory is over. Now you're about to see the reality of the prize. The grappling hooks dig deep, and the two ships are drawn together with a heavy groan of wood against wood. Planks are thrown across the gap, creating a crude bridge. The quartermaster, the scarred man who hired you, leads the boarding party, and you are part of it. A heavy flintlock pistol tucked into your belt and your heart thumping a steady, nervous rhythm. You clamber over the rail and onto the deck of the Spanish brigantine. The scene is one of quiet, terrified submission. The Spanish sailors are huddled together, their eyes wide watching your every move. Your job is to look intimidating, a role you feel woefully unprepared for, but you do your best to scowl and stand your ground. It's one of the more awkward parts of the job. There is no chaos, no swashbuckling. The quartermaster directs the takeover with the cool efficiency of a factory foreman. The Spanish crew is disarmed, their officers escorted to their own cabins to be held under guard. The process is swift, professional, and free of the cruelty you might have feared. Good business practice dictates that a reputation for mercy encourages future ships to surrender just as easily. Your team, crowbars in hand, is sent down into the main cargo hold. The air below is thick with the smells of tar, molasses, and dampness. This is the moment of truth. The treasure hunt you've heard stories about. You pry open the first large crate with a screech of protesting nails. Inside, nestled in straw, is not the glint of gold, but the deep, earthy blue of indigo dye. Valuable, yes, but hardly the stuff of legend. The next crate contains bolts of rough canvas. Another holds barrels of sugar. You find casks of Spanish wine, sacks of flour, coils of new rope, spare navigational tools, and a chest of muskets and ammunition. It's a haul of immense practical value, both for use on your own ship and for sale in a friendly port. But as you look around the hold, you can't help but feel a touch of disappointment. The real treasure, you think to yourself, is all this flour that might delay our next thrilling encounter with hardtack. You're also allowed to search the crew's quarters for personal plunder. This is often more immediately rewarding. You find a pair of sturdy leather boots that are a perfect fit, a warm wool coat and a small silver buckle on a belt. It's these small tangible luxuries that make the life feel momentarily richer. Meanwhile, the quartermaster is in his element, a ledger book and a piece of charcoal in hand. He moves through the captured ship like a very serious, very well-armed accountant, meticulously cataloguing every barrel, every bolt of cloth, every weapon. He assigns a value to each item, his word the final law. While the articles promised a democratic share, historians debate how often the quartermaster's valuation of goods might have subtly favoured the officers, a practice that could lead to resentment and even mutiny if not handled with care. Once the inventory is complete, the real work begins, transferring the plunder from their ship to yours. For hours you haul barrels and crates across the swaying planks, your muscles straining. Finally, with the loot secured on the Sea Serpent, the crew gathers for the division. The quartermaster stands before you all and announces the total estimated value of the prize. He then begins to distribute some of the smaller items. There might be an auction for a particularly fine coat or a good sword, the price bid by each sailor recorded as a debit against their share. You receive a bottle of wine, a new knife, and a few Spanish silver coins. The bulk of the profit from the sale of the sugar and indigo is a promise, a number written next to your name in the ship's book, to be paid out weeks or months from now. You look at your first share. It's more than you could have earned in a year of backbreaking honest labour. Of that there is no doubt. But it is a far cry from the chests overflowing with jewels and gold pieces that fill the popular legends. You realise that piracy, at its heart, isn't a fantasy of instant riches. It's a business. A slow, dangerous and methodical business of asset acquisition. Standing on the deck, you watch as the officers decide what to do with the now empty Spanish ship. Your first taste of plunder wasn't a thrilling adventure. It was a long and tiring day of manual labour, and a sobering lesson in the practical economics of your new trade. With the hold full of Spanish wine and indigo dye, a new kind of quiet settles over the Sea Serpent. The thrill of the chase and the labour of the plunder are done. Now comes a far greater challenge, one of patience and precision. You have to find your way home. Or at least to a place that passes for home in your new line of work, a friendly port where your cargo can be turned into coin. Suddenly, the most important man on board is not the captain with his bluster, or the quartermaster with his ledger, but the ship's navigator. He is a quiet, focused man named Finch, and he is, in theory, the only person on this ship who has any idea where you are. You begin to observe his strange and vital rituals. Finch guards his tools with a fierce jealousy. A collection of rolled-up charts, a brass spyglass, a well-worn magnetic compass, and a curious-looking instrument of wood and brass called a quadrant. You learn that navigating the vast, featureless expanse of the ocean is less a single action, and more a constant, ongoing conversation with the elements. It's an art form built on a few scraps of science. The easiest part, you discover, is finding your latitude, your position north or south of the equator. Every day, if the sun is out, Finch performs a ceremony at high noon. He stands on the quarterdeck, raises his quadrant to his eye, and squints into the sun, measuring its exact angle above the horizon. This single measurement, combined with the tables in his nautical almanac, tells him how far up or down the map you are. It's a moment of reassuring certainty in a life that has very little of it. The hard part, the great and maddening puzzle of 18th century sailing, is finding your longitude. To know your east-west position, Finch explains to you one quiet afternoon. You need to know the precise time both on the ship and at a fixed point back in London, but the delicate pendulum clocks that keep time on land are useless on the violent, rocking deck of a ship. Without an accurate clock, determining longitude is less a science and more a form of educated guessing, with a hint of witchcraft. So you rely on a cruder method, a system charmingly known as dead reckoning. You've always wondered about the name, and you're beginning to suspect it's because if you get it wrong you end up dead. The process is beautifully simple and wildly imprecise. A sailor at the stern throws a small weighted piece of wood, the chip log, into the water. The log is attached to a long rope with knots tied at regular intervals. Another sailor holds a 28-second sandglass. As the sand runs out, you count how many knots have slipped through your fingers, and that is your speed in knots. Using this speed, the direction from the compass, and the time elapsed, Finch makes an estimation of your position on his chart. It's a guess, built on a previous guess, that will inform the next guess. This is why Finch is more of an artist than a scientist. He supplements his flawed calculations with a lifetime of experience. He tastes the air. He studies the colour of the water. knowing that a subtle shift from deep blue to a murky green can mean you're approaching shallower coastal waters. He points out a flock of petrels skimming the waves and tells you they rarely venture more than a day's journey from land. He consults the stolen Spanish charts, but treats them with suspicion, knowing they are often inaccurate. Historians and maritime experts debate just how skilled the average pirate navigator truly was. Were they masters of celestial navigation, or did they primarily rely on experienced stolen charts and hugging coastlines whenever possible? Watching Finch, you realise the answer is all of the above. He uses whatever he can. Your role in all of this is minor but essential. You are the one tasked with holding the sandglass steady, with calling out the time, with making sure the navigator's workspace is kept clear. You watch him work, and a new kind of respect dawns on you. Before, the ocean was just a big empty space between destinations. Now, you see it as a living landscape full of subtle signs and secret clues. It's a place that cannot be conquered, only understood. At the end of the day, Finch takes a deep breath, and with a steady hand makes a small X on his chart. That mark represents his best guess as to your location in the entire vast world. And as the ship sails on into the gathering night, you put your faith in that little cross, hoping with all your heart that he's pointing you in the right direction. Weeks bleed into one another. The sea is a vast, unchanging wilderness of blue and grey. The initial excitement of your captured prize has long since faded, replaced by the deep, profound boredom of a long voyage. And as the days stretch on, you become intimately familiar with the less than glamorous realities of life at sea. Your ship, the Sea Serpent, is not just a vessel. It's a floating, self-contained ecosystem, and you are not its most privileged inhabitant. You learn to coexist with your numerous, uninvited shipmates. At night, in the quiet of the hold, you hear the faint scratching and scurrying of the rats. They are a constant presence, shadowy figures that dart across moonlit decks. You've come to accept them as part of the crew, figures with far more seniority than yourself. You learn to tap your biscuit, the brick-hard bread that is the staple of your diet, against the table before you eat. This is to knock out the weevils, the small black insects that burrow into every barrel. At first, it horrified you. Now you barely notice, accepting the occasional crunch as a bit of extra protein. And then there is the constant low-grade itch from the lice that thrive in the damp wool of your clothes and the shared canvas of the hammocks. Personal hygiene, you discover, is a concept that ranks somewhere below polishing the cannons and above talking about your feelings. Fresh water is more precious than gold, strictly rationed for drinking and cooking. Bathing is out of the question. The most you can manage is a brisk rub-down with a rag dipped in cold, salty seawater, a process that leaves your skin feeling sticky and raw. The decks are swabbed daily, but it's a theatrical kind of cleaning. The ship has a permanent layered smell of tar, bilge water, unwashed bodies, and something vaguely like old cheese. It is in this environment that a more insidious enemy than any naval patrol begins to make its presence felt. You see it first in one of the older sailors, an unnatural exhaustion that sleep doesn't seem to cure. He complains of his joints, his old wounds aching more than usual. Then you notice his gums look swollen and dark, his teeth loose when he speaks. The word is whispered among the crew with a kind of dread. Scurvy. It's the slow, creeping plague of the deep sea. A malady born of a diet devoid of anything fresh. This inevitably brings you to the ship's surgeon, a man named Cobb, whom the crew seems to fear more than any disease. His domain is a small, grim corner of the ship where he keeps his terrifying collection of saws, knives, and probes. His primary diagnostic tool, you joke to yourself, appears to be a large hacksaw, and his answer to most ailments is either to bleed the patient or give them a powerful laxative. Historians and medical experts debate the actual efficacy of the 18th century ship's surgeon. Were they all just unskilled sawbones, or did some possess a practical, if brutal, knowledge that saved lives? Watching Cobb, you lean towards the former. He doesn't understand that scurvy comes from a lack of fresh fruit. He believes, like most of his time, that sickness comes from miasma, or bad air. To combat the general decline in the crew's health, he orders buckets of tar to be brought below deck and set alight. The thick, acrid smoke that fills the sleeping quarters is supposed to purify the air. It does nothing but make your eyes water and your lungs burn. Another of his favoured treatments is to wash the decks down with vinegar, replacing the usual odours with a sharp, pickling smell that is only a slight improvement. You focus on your own survival. You try to keep your bedding as dry as possible. You eat what you are given without complaint, but you are careful. You learn to live with a level of grime that your former self would have found unimaginable. Lying in your hammock at night, you feel the damp chill seeping deep into your bones. You listen to the chorus of coughs and groans that are the ship's nightly symphony, and you realise, with a heavy certainty, that the most dangerous things on the ocean are not the storms or the cannons. They are the invisible enemies. The rot in the water barrel, the worm in the biscuit, and the slow, silent decay that begins inside your own body, thousands of miles from the nearest shore. You learn that life at sea is governed by two great, relentless forces, the wind and your stomach. With the realities of sickness and poor hygiene now a part of your daily existence, your attention turns to the root cause of it all, the food. The call to meals, a welcome diversion on land, is met here with a kind of weary resignation. You line up with your wooden bowl and cup, waiting for your ration from the ship's cook, a one-legged man named Silas, who you now realise tells such good stories because he has a captive and hungry audience. The cornerstone of every meal, the very foundation of your diet, is the ship's biscuit. It's also known as hardtack, and you quickly understand why. It's a simple flour and water biscuit, baked twice until it achieves a hardness somewhere between petrified wood and solid rock. You suspect it could be used as a whetstone or perhaps a building material. To make it remotely edible, you must soak it for a long time in whatever you're drinking until it softens into a pulpy mush. The biscuits are baked to last for years, and they do, a feat accomplished by making them utterly inhospitable to almost all life, with the notable exception of the weevil. You've learned to accept these insects as an unavoidable garnish. The other pillar of your diet is salted meat. Huge barrels in the hold are packed with cuts of beef and pork preserved in a thick, greasy brine. When Silas needs to make a meal, a chunk of this meat is hauled up on deck and soaked in a bucket of seawater for hours to draw out some of the overpowering salt and to soften it from its rock-like state. It is then boiled endlessly into a stew of questionable origin. You eat it, but you try not to look too closely. It's a fun game you play with yourself with Guess the Cut, but the answer is almost always gristle. This tough, stringy meat, along with a bland porridge of boiled peas or oatmeal, constitutes the main course of nearly every meal. To wash this down, you have a few options, each with its own distinct charm. The first is water, stored in wooden casks. After weeks at sea, the water grows stale and develops a slimy green coating on the inside of the barrel, giving the drink a distinctly swampy flavour. Because of this, sailors prefer to drink beer or wine when it's available. The problem is that weak beer, the kind stored on ships, often spoils and turns sour almost as quickly as the water. This leaves the most reliable and most famous pirate beverage, grog. You learn it's a simple mixture of the ship's rum ration, water, and sometimes a bit of lime or sugar if the stores allow. Adding rum to the foul-tasting water doesn't make it any safer to drink, you realise, but it does a remarkable job of making you care a whole lot less. However, there is a silver lining to the pirate's life. Historians debate whether pirates, through their constant plundering, actually ate better than their contemporaries in the Royal Navy. While a Navy sailor's rations were consistent, they were consistently monotonous. You, on the other hand, get to experience moments of feasting. After capturing the Spanish brigantine, for a few glorious days, life was different. The ship had live chickens and a pig. Suddenly, you were eating roasted pork. They had barrels of Spanish wine, a luxury that made you forget all about slimy water. It is during these times of plenty that Silas the cook gets to be creative, whipping up a legendary pirate dish called salmagundi. It's a chaotic, all-encompassing salad. He takes whatever is on hand, the chopped salted beef, slices of the roasted pork, a few captured pickled onions and anchovies, hard-boiled eggs from the chickens, and mixes it all together. He then dresses it with oil, vinegar, and a heavy dose of all the spices you've captured. It is a riot of flavour, a welcome explosion of taste in a world of blandness. But the feasts are fleeting. The fresh meat is quickly consumed, the good wine drunk. All too soon you are back to the familiar reality of hardtack and salted beef. You sit on the deck, dunking your biscuit into your cup of grog and chew your tough salty dinner. You've learned to stop thinking of food as a source of pleasure and to see it purely as fuel. It is a means to an end. But as you eat, you can't help but dream of the next prize, not just for the promise of silver, but for the tantalising possibility that its hold might contain a barrel of fresh, crisp apples. After a meal that does more to fill your stomach than to lift your spirits, you are faced with the vast empty canvas of the rest of the day. you have come to learn a fundamental truth about the pirate's life, a truth the legends conveniently omit. It is composed of about 1% terrifying adrenaline-fueled action and 99% profound soul-crushing boredom. The most common and enduring activity on any pirate ship is, simply, waiting. Waiting for a prize, waiting for a fair win, waiting for the journey to end. As dusk settles, the first and most welcome remedy for this boredom often appears. From somewhere in the crew, a man will produce a fiddle, its wood dark and worn from years of use. Another might have a small, shrill-sounding fife. There is no formal concert. The fiddler simply starts to play a familiar jig, his foot tapping out the rhythm on the wooden deck, and a small crowd gathers. The music is rarely polished. Enthusiasm, you note, often outpaces raw talent, but it is heartfelt and alive. It's a sound that temporarily pushes back the immense silence of the sea. After the music, the singing often begins. This is when you hear the sea shanties in their natural habitat. While everyone agrees shanties were sung, historians debate their primary function. Were they purely for entertainment, a way to pass the evening, or were they critical work songs? Their steady call and response rhythm essential for coordinating the hard collective labour of hoisting a sail or weighing the anchor. You realise they are both. By night, they are sung for leisure, but the words and melodies are so ingrained in the crew that when the work needs doing, the same songs become the engine that drives the ship. When the music fades, the storytelling takes over. This is when you discover that every man on this ship is the star of his own grand, heroic epic. You listen to tales of surviving hurricanes by lashing oneself to the mast, of fighting off sharks with only a belaying pin, of charming the most beautiful barmaid in Tortuga. You quickly learn to take every story with a large grain of salt. The fish is always bigger, the storm is always stronger, and the storyteller is always cleverer in the retelling. But it's a powerful form of entertainment, a way for the men to build their own legends and to escape for a moment the monotonous reality of their lives. In quieter corners of the ship, other pastimes unfold. You see small groups of men huddled over a greasy, well-worn deck of cards, or rolling dice carved from bone. Your ship's articles forbid gambling for money, a rule designed to prevent violent disputes, so they play for smaller stakes, their next day's rum ration, a desirable chore, or simply for bragging rights. It's less about the thrill of winning, and more about the simple focus of the game, a welcome distraction from the endless rolling of the ship. Sometimes, during a long period of calm when the sails hang limp and the heat makes tempers short, the crew will invent its own diversions. One afternoon, to break the foul mood, the quartermaster organises a mock trial. The defendant is the ship's cat, formerly accused of dereliction of duty for failing to catch a particularly bold rat. Men are assigned as lawyers for the prosecution and the defence. Witnesses give absurd, dramatic testimony. It is a ridiculous, hilarious piece of communal theatre, a way to vent frustrations and reassert the community of the ship through laughter. You find your own quiet ways to fill the hours. You spend long afternoons practising the complex knots the bosun showed you, your fingers slowly learning the intricate dance of the rope. You watch an older sailor patiently carving a detailed scene onto a piece of whale tooth, an art he calls scrimshaw. You learn that the only way to defeat the great boredom is not to fight it, but to fill it with small, focused tasks. Lying in your hammock, listening to the distant, scratchy notes of the fiddle, you understand that surviving this life is as much about enduring the calm as it is about weathering the storm. It's about finding a way to fill the profound, silent emptiness, one slow hour at a time. Living as Jack, you have a unique and privileged view into the heart of this isolated, masculine world. From behind your disguise you observe the strange, unspoken rules that govern the crew of the Sea Serpent. And you notice, with the keen eye of an outsider, how the profound and near-total absence of women shapes everything. It is a constant, invisible presence, a ghost that haunts the conversations, the dreams, and the quiet, lonely moments of every man on board. For the most part, romance is a thing that happens elsewhere. It's a story you tell, a memory you embellish, or a future you boast about. You listen as the men, gathered on deck during quiet evenings, talk of the women they've known in ports from Barbados to Bristol. The stories are almost always loud, crude, and laced with exaggeration. They are tales of conquest, of money spent freely on drink and companionship. It's a performance for each other, a way of building a reputation for worldliness and virility. But as you listen, you begin to hear the quiet notes of loneliness beneath the boisterous harmony. Their idea of romance seems to be a loud, fleeting and expensive transaction, over almost as soon as it begins. The story of Anne Bonny and Calico Jack, still fresh in your mind from Silas's telling, serves as a cautionary tale. A woman on board was a rarity, a complication that introduced jealousies and passions that a ship's fragile social order could barely withstand. It's why your own ship's articles, like so many others, strictly forbid it. A woman's presence was seen as a spark that could ignite the whole powder keg. But in a world so devoid of female companionship, other forms of partnership born of necessity and trust sometimes emerged. You hear some of the older sailors, men who sailed with the buccaneers of a previous generation, use a French word, matelotage. It was, they explain, a formal bond, a kind of civil union between two male pirates. They would join their property, share their plunder, and nurse each other through sickness or injury. If one man died in battle, his partner, his matelot, inherited everything, ensuring his share didn't just get absorbed back into the general fund. It was a pirate's life insurance policy. Historians debate the precise nature of these unions. Were they purely pragmatic economic partnerships, a way to protect one's assets in a lawless world? Or did they often encompass deeper romantic and emotional bonds? You find yourself pondering this as you watch two of your crewmates, a quiet Irishman named Finn and a hulking Nordic sailor called Gunnar. They are inseparable. They are hammock mates. They share their rations, and in a fight they move as one, always protecting the other's back. Theirs is a quiet, unspoken devotion that seems to transcend simple friendship. You don't ask questions, you just observe, recognizing it as another of the complex hidden currents that run beneath the surface of this life. In this brutal and uncertain existence, you realize, companionship is a treasure more valuable than any plundered gold. It is the anchor in a world that is constantly shifting. For some, that anchor is the boisterous memory of a night in port. For others, it might be a deep, trusting partnership with a matelot. For many, you suspect, the truest and most reliable relationship they have is with the ship itself, the creaking, groaning wooden world that is both their vessel and their prison. As you try to fall asleep, lulled by the familiar sounds of the ship, you reflect that romance at sea is not about whispered sweet nothings or stolen glances. It's about something far more fundamental. It's about finding a single, trustworthy soul to stand with you against the vast, indifferent ocean. It is about survival, loyalty, and the deeply human need to find a safe harbour in another person, even here, at the forgotten edge of the world. The nights at sea have a way of inviting reflection, and your mind often drifts back to the stories Silas told. You find him one evening, leaning against the rail, gazing at the milky spill of the stars. You ask him the question that's been lingering for weeks. What happened to Anne Bonny and Mary Red? A slow smile spreads across the old pirate's face, and he seems happy to pick up the thread of the yarn. "Ah," he says, his voice a low rumble. "Their alliance. Once their secrets were known to each other and to Calico Jack, things on the Revenge changed. Anne and Mary became a fighting unit unlike any the Caribbean had ever seen." He describes how they fought side by side, their skills complementing each other. Anne was all fire and fury, a whirlwind of pistols and curses. Mary, still living as Mark Reed to the rest of the crew, was quieter, more precise, a deadly swordsman. The crew, oblivious to Mary's true identity, came to respect this formidable pair. They were, without question, the two most dangerous people on that ship. But fate, Silas says, tapping his pipe on the rail, was not done with its little jokes. He tells you that soon after their alliance was forged, an almost unbelievable complication arose. First Anne, and then Mary became pregnant. The two warrior women on a tiny pirate sloop in a world of men were now carrying children. It's a scenario so improbable it feels like a tall tale, yet the court records bear it out. Historians can only speculate how they managed this. Was their condition an open secret, tolerated by a crew who valued their skill? Or did they successfully conceal it until the very end? A feat of incredible endurance and cunning on such a cramped vessel? Whatever the case, their time was running out. In October of 1720, the crew of the Revenge was celebrating a recent prize, spending the night drinking rum off the coast of Jamaica. Calico Jack, never one to let discipline get in the way of a party, was as drunk as the rest of his men. They were ambushed in the darkness by a pirate-hunting sloop captained by a man named Jonathan Barnett. The pirates were caught completely by surprise. According to the legends, Most of the men were too drunk to even stand, let alone fight. It was Anne and Mary who tried to rally a defence, firing their pistols into the dark and screaming at their drunken crewmates to stand and fight like men. The resistance was brief and futile. The entire crew was captured and taken to Spanish Town, Jamaica, to stand trial. The trial, Silas explains, was a swift affair. Piracy was a hanging offence, and the evidence was overwhelming. One by one, Calico Jack and his crew were found guilty and sentenced to the gallows. The sentence was pronounced for them all, including Anne Bonny and the still-disguised Mark Reed. Death. Then came the final dramatic act. The judge, following legal custom, asked the prisoners if there was any reason the sentence of death should not be carried out. The male pirates were silent, their fates sealed. But then Anne Bonny spoke up, her voice clear in the stunned courtroom. And after her, Mary Reed did the same. They informed the court that they could not be hanged. They were pleading the belly. They were pregnant. Imagine the scene of the stuffy courtroom, the bewigged judge, the condemned pirates, and these two women delivering their final shocking revelation. This was a recognised, if rare, legal plea under English common law. An unborn child was considered an innocent party, and it was illegal to execute a pregnant woman. It was the one condition that the ship's surgeon couldn't fix with a saw, and the one condition the royal courts had to respect. Physicians were hastily summoned to the jail. They examined the two women and confirmed it to the court. They were indeed with child. Silas falls silent, letting the weight of it settle. The two fiercest pirates on the Revenge, captured and condemned, were now saved for a time by the very secret they had fought so hard to conceal. The law, which had been so quick to condemn them, was now tangled in its own rules, forced to become their temporary protector. Their executions were stayed. They were led back to prison, their lives hanging by the thinnest of threads, their ultimate fates left in the hands of time. The story of Anne and Mary, left hanging in the balance in a Jamaican prison cell, stays with you for days. It makes you wonder. You find Silas again on a calm evening, the ship gliding smoothly through a dark, placid sea. You ask him the question that's been forming in your mind. Were there others, or were Anne and Mary the only ones? Silas lets out a low chuckle, a sound like gravel rolling in a gentle tide. "Lad," he says, "history is full of formidable women. You just have to know where to look. Usually it's in the footnotes, or in the tales of an old salt like me." He tells you that while the Caribbean's Golden Age had its famous pair, the seas have known the wrath of women for centuries all around the globe. He decides to tell you about two that Bonny and Reed probably never even heard of. First, he says, "Let me tell you a story of pure, cold vengeance. We have to go back in time, to the 1300s, to the coast of France." He tells the tale of a noblewoman named Jeanne de Clisson. She was living a happy life, married to a nobleman she adored. But during a war, the King of France grew suspicious of her husband, accused him of treason, and had him executed without a fair trial. Jeanne's grief, Silas explains, was not the kind that fades with tears. It was the kind that hardens into a diamond-sharp point. As the saying goes, Silas says with a grim smile, hell hath no fury like a noblewoman whose husband has been wrongfully executed by a king. Jeanne sold off her lands, all her castles and estates, and used the immense fortune to purchase 3 warships. She had them painted pitch black, and their sails dyed a deep blood red. She called her flagship quite simply My Revenge. For the next 13 years, this lioness of Brittany and her black fleet became the terror of the English Channel. She had only one mission, to hunt the ships of the French king and his nobility. She would slaughter the crews, leaving only a few survivors to return to the king with the tale of the furious woman in black who had sent them. It was not piracy for profit. It was piracy as an instrument of unrelenting personal war. Silas pauses, letting the image of the black ships with their red sails fade. But not all she-pirates were driven by such a hot fire, he continues. For some, it was a cold and calculated business of power. He then steers the conversation to the Mediterranean Sea in the 1500s. And sometimes, he says, the line between a pirate and a queen depends entirely on which side of the cannon you're standing. Historians, he tells you, debate this all the time. He tells you of Sayyida al-Hurra, the Queen of Tetuan in Morocco. As a child, she was a princess in the glittering kingdom of Granada in Spain, but her family was forced to flee when the Christian monarchs conquered the city. This exile filled her with a lifelong desire for retribution against the Spanish and Portuguese. She rose to become the governor of her city, a powerful ruler on land, but her power extended to the sea. She commanded a formidable pirate fleet that dominated the western Mediterranean. To the Spanish, she was a terrifying pirate. To her own people, she was a freedom fighter, their great leader striking back at the empire that had wronged them. You learn that she rarely sailed on the ships herself. She was a stateswoman, a queen who used piracy as a tool of foreign policy. She grew so powerful that the Christian governments of Spain and Portugal were forced to negotiate with her directly, primarily for the release of the thousands of captives her fleet had taken. She was a pirate, yes, but she was also a political power who held the balance of the Mediterranean in her hand for decades. Silas falls silent, his stories for the night complete. You sit in the quiet, marvelling at the different paths these women took to the same lawless life, one driven by personal grief, another by political ambition. They were separated by centuries and seas, by culture and motive. You realise that Bonny and Reed were not an anomaly. They were just two names in a long, secret history of women who, when pushed by the world of men, refused to break. Instead, they took to the sea and chose to rule their own fate. You're still turning over the tales of vengeance and power, of Jeanne de Clisson and Saïda al-Hurrar, when Silas holds up a hand. "No, lad," he says, a deep respect in his voice. "I've saved the greatest story for last. All these others, Bonny, Red, even the Lioness of Brittany, they were rebels, leaders of gangs. Now let me tell you about a woman who was an emperor, the most successful pirate in all of human history." He tells you to forget the Caribbean and its small sloops. The story now moves east to the South China Sea and forward in time to the early 1800s, almost a century after Calico Jack met his end. The story begins, Silas says, on a flower boat, a floating brothel in the city of Canton. Here, a young woman named Shi Yang was a prostitute, but she was also possessed of a sharp mind and a shrewd understanding of power. Her beauty and intelligence caught the eye of a man named Zheng Yi, the commander of a massive pirate coalition known as the Red Flag Fleet. He married her. And here, Silas says, is the first mystery. Historians debate how much power she, now known as Qing Shi, wielded while her husband was alive. Was she merely his pretty wife, a captive who learned her place? Or was she a partner from the beginning, a key strategist who helped her husband unite the warring pirate factions into the empire it would become? No one knows for sure, but what happened next gives us a clue. A few years into their marriage, Zheng Yi died unexpectedly at sea. In that moment of chaos, a power vacuum opened, and the entire pirate confederation could have splintered into 100 warring factions, but Qing Shi acted with breathtaking speed and brilliance. She immediately forged a strategic alliance with her late husband's adopted son and most powerful commander, a young man named Chung Po Tsai. She secured his loyalty, and through him the loyalty of the other fleet commanders. It was a masterstroke of backroom dealing and political manoeuvring. A classic tale of corporate succession, Silas says dryly, if your corporation commanded thousands of warships. With her power consolidated, Qing Shi became the undisputed commander of the Red Flag Fleet, and her fleet was an empire on the water, an organisation so vast it makes Calico Jack's little crew look like a handful of street toughs. At its height, she commanded over 1,800 pirate junks, some of them massive ocean-going vessels that could carry 40 cannons. Under her command were somewhere between 70,000 and 80,000 pirates, men, women, and even children. Her fleet was larger and more powerful than many nations' navies. They didn't just raid ships, they controlled huge swathes of the coastline, setting up governments, collecting taxes from villages, and running a massive protection racket that dominated all trade in the region. She was so powerful that no one could stop her. The ruling Qing dynasty sent fleet after fleet against her, and she defeated them all, capturing their ships and adding them to her own forces. The Portuguese, who had a colony in Macau, sent their warships against her. She beat them too. Even the mighty British East India Company, the most powerful trading company in the world, learned to fear her name and her fleet of red-sailed junks. She was not a nuisance, she was a geopolitical force. And then comes the most remarkable part of her story. After years of roiling the South China Sea, the Chinese government, having failed time and again to defeat her militarily, decided to try a different tactic. They offered her amnesty, and Qing Shi, a brilliant strategist to the very end, saw her opportunity for the ultimate victory. She personally and peacefully led a delegation of women and children into the Governor-General's palace to negotiate the terms of her surrender. Her demands were audacious. A full pardon not just for her, but for every single one of her thousands of followers. The right for them all to keep their ill-gotten plunder. And, for her top commanders, positions within the Chinese government and military. The government, exhausted and humiliated, agreed to almost everything. Silas leans back, his story complete. Qing Shi, the former prostitute, the pirate queen, the undefeated admiral, simply retired. She kept her vast fortune, married her second-in-command, Chung Po Tsai, and opened her own gambling house, which she ran until she died peacefully as a wealthy grandmother in her late 60s. It is, Silas says with finality, without question, the most successful career in the entire history of piracy. She beat the world at its own game, and then she walked away, a winner. Your mind is still reeling from the sheer scale of Qing Shi's story. An empire of 80,000 pirates, a fleet of nearly 2,000 ships, a career that ended not at the gallows but in wealthy retirement. It seems impossible. But Silas, you ask, your voice barely a whisper in the quiet of the night, how? How does one person, a woman no less, command that many ruthless outlaws? They would have torn each other apart. Silas takes a slow, deliberate puff of his pipe. Ah, now you're asking the important question, lad. Her true genius was not in fighting, but in governance. She controlled her empire with something far more powerful than a sword. A code of laws so strict and so absolute it made our own pirate articles look like a friendly suggestion. It tells you that the code you signed on the Sea Serpent, with its votes and its shares, was a democracy for rogues. Qing Shi's code was the iron law of an empress. It was less a friendly agreement and more the terms of service for a very dangerous corporation, where clicking "I disagree" was not an option. The first and most important rule, he explains, was about plunder. Unlike the Caribbean tradition where every man might grab what he could before a formal division, in the Red Flag Fleet, all loot, without exception, had to be brought to a communal treasury. Everything was registered and logged by clerks before anything was distributed. The leadership took its share first, a hefty 20%, and the rest was divided amongst the fleet. If you were caught holding back so much as a single silver coin, Silas says, his voice flat, you were put to death. No trial, no appeal. Their accounting department had a very strict and very final policy on embezzlement. This single rule prevented the infighting over treasure that destroyed so many smaller pirate crews. Next, and perhaps most surprisingly, were her rules regarding captives and villages. Unsanctioned raids on villages that paid for the fleet's protection were strictly forbidden. But her most famous laws concerned the treatment of female captives. Any pirate who assaulted a female captive was immediately beheaded. If a pirate wished to take a captive woman as his wife, he could do so, but he was required to be faithful to her and treat her with respect. Any infidelity on his part was also a capital offence. Silas adds his own cynical wisdom here. Don't mistake this for high-minded morality, lad. Qing Shi understood that a fleet of men, driven mad by lust and fighting over women, is an undisciplined, useless army. Her rules were about maintaining order, plain and simple. The discipline was absolute and touched every aspect of life. If a pirate went ashore without permission, he was caught, and his ears were pierced as a public humiliation. If he did it a second time, he was executed. If he gave an order that didn't come from a superior officer, he was executed. If he deserted his post, he was hunted down and executed. There was no room for the kind of swaggering individualism you see every day on this ship. You were a soldier in an army, a cog in a massive machine, and you were expected to obey without question. Silas falls silent, letting you absorb the brutal efficiency of it all. Historians, he muses, debate whether her code was a tool of tyrannical control or a brilliant piece of statecraft. Was she a despot, or was she a nation-builder who understood that to fight a government, you must first become one? She transformed a chaotic mob of thousands into a disciplined military force that could challenge empires. Her power came not from promising her followers absolute freedom, but from demanding of them absolute obedience. It was a different vision of piracy altogether, one built not on the dream of individual rebellion, but on the strength of collective iron-willed order. You try to imagine it. 80,000 pirates. a force that could swallow nations. But in your mind's eye, you just see thousands of ships like the Sea Serpent. A sea crowded with familiar masts and rigging. Silas, you ask, what kind of ships were they? How could they even build that many? The old sailor shakes his head, a slow smile playing on his lips. Ah, that's because you're thinking with a Caribbean mind, lad. Her fleet wasn't made of sloops and frigates. It was an entirely different world of wood and wind. Her pirates sailed on junks. He begins to describe the vessel, and you realise it's unlike anything you've ever seen. The silhouette itself is alien. A traditional Chinese junk has a broad, flat bottom with no keel, designed for stability and for navigating the shallow rivers and deltas of the coast. Its stern rises high out of the water, like a multi-storey castle, making it look as though it's constantly looking down its nose at other lesser ships. And at the bow, most junks have a pair of large painted eyes, an oculus, because as Silas explains, a ship needs to be able to see where it's going. But the true genius of the junk, he tells you, is in its sails. You're used to the complex web of ropes and pulleys required to manage your ship's heavy canvas sails. It takes a team of men, pulling in frantic coordination, to handle them in a rising wind. The junk's sails are a marvel of simplicity and efficiency. They are stiffened with a series of bamboo poles or battens, running horizontally across the fabric, giving the sail the look of a dragonfly's wing or a folding fan. This design means a small crew can raise or lower the sail with a single rope. In a sudden squall, when your crew is scrambling frantically in the rigging to reef the sails, a junk's crew can shorten theirs in seconds, with perfect control. It's lazy sailing, Silas says with admiration, the work of brilliant, lazy men. For centuries, European sailors dismissed the junk as a clumsy, awkward vessel. But Silas tells you that modern sailors are realising the genius of the design. Historians and naval architects now debate whether its incredible stability, its resistance to sinking due to its watertight internal compartments or bulkheads, and the efficiency of its sails actually made it a superior vessel for ocean travel in many conditions. The biggest difference, however, was not in the wood or the sails, but in the life lived within. Your ship, the Sea Serpent, Silas says, gesturing around you, is a barracks. It's a temporary workplace for men who have another life on land, even if it's just a memory. Qingxi's junks, they were homes. Because of her strict code and the permanent nature of her fleet, whole families lived aboard the ships. Pirates served alongside their wives and children. It was not a band of rogues on a temporary adventure. It was a mobile, floating society. You try to imagine the scene. Laundry hanging to dry next to a rack of cutlasses, the sound of children playing on deck, the smell of rice and grilled fish mixing with the scent of gunpowder. How do you enforce lights out at 8 p.m. with a baby crying in the next compartment? You close your eyes and try to replace the familiar sounds of your own ship with the world he has painted. The deep groan of your ship's oak timbers would be replaced by the creak of the teak and camphor wood. The snap of your canvas sails would become the unique rattle and whisper of bamboo battens. The whole sensory experience would be different, a testament to a completely separate tradition of living on the sea. You realise that Qingxi's empire wasn't just a different kind of piracy. It was a different reality, born of a different culture, on ships that sailed with a different wisdom. It was a true city on the ocean, one you can now, finally, begin to imagine. The story of Qingxi's vast, orderly empire hangs in the air, a concept almost too large to grasp. Seeing you still awake, your mind clearly turning over these tales, Silas the storyteller offers a final history for the night. "I have one more for you, lad," he says, his voice softer now. "A much older story. Before the Golden Age, before the Caribbean became a pirate nest. Let us leave the warm eastern seas and travel back to the grey, misty shores of 16th century Ireland. I will tell you of a pirate queen named Grace O'Malley. Her story," he begins, "starts not with poverty or scandal, but with a deep, abiding love for the sea. She was Grania Mhaol, the daughter of a powerful chieftain on the west coast of Ireland, whose clan, the O'Malleys, were renowned seafarers. They ruled the waves, their wealth coming from both legitimate trade and a less legitimate form of taxation, demanding a toll from any fishing or trading vessel that passed through their territory. As a young girl, Grace desperately wanted to join her father on a voyage. He refused, telling her that her long hair would get caught in the ship's ropes. In response, she promptly took a knife and chopped off all her hair, presenting herself to her stunned father. Her direct approach to problem-solving worked. She went to sea. When her father died, Grace, through sheer force of will and maritime skill, took his place as head of the clan. This was almost unheard of in a world dominated by men. She commanded a fleet of galleys and an army of hundreds of fighting men. And here, Silas explains, we come to another of those debates historians love so much. The English, who were trying to conquer Ireland, called her a lawless pirate. But to the Irish clans, was she a pirate, or was she a legitimate chieftain, defending her territory and continuing her family's business? In truth, she was both. She was a warrior queen in every sense. She lived on her ships, leading raids herself, and her toughness was the stuff of legend. Silas tells you the most famous story about her, how she gave birth to her youngest son Tibbet while at sea on one of her galleys. The very next day, her ship was attacked by Algerian corsairs. Hearing the battle go poorly on deck, Grace supposedly left her newborn son, wrapped herself in a blanket, and appeared before her men, roaring orders and firing a blunderbuss. The sight of their furious chieftain so shocked and inspired her crew that they rallied and won the day. Most women take a few weeks to recover from childbirth, Silas says with a wry grin. Grace O'Malley took a few hours, then fought off a pirate attack. Her entire life was a battle against the encroaching power of England, which sought to crush the old Gaelic way of life. Her nemesis was the English governor of the region, Sir Richard Bingham, who captured her sons and seized her lands, only strangling her power. Pushed into a corner, Grace did something audacious. She sailed directly to England, to the heart of her enemy's power, to seek a personal audience with the formidable Queen Elizabeth I. Silas describes the legendary meeting at Greenwich Palace. Grace, the Irish chieftain, refusing to bow before the English queen, for she did not recognise Elizabeth as her ruler. The court was horrified, but Elizabeth, perhaps seeing a kindred spirit in this defiant, powerful woman, granted the audience. As they spoke no common language, the two queens, one of a nation and one of a clan, negotiated in Latin. It was less a subject pleading with her monarch and more a tense meeting between the CEOs of two rival corporations. Grace demanded the release of her sons and the removal of Governor Bingham, and in return she would cease her piracy against English ships. She left London, having achieved most of her aims, a stunning victory of diplomacy. She returned to her beloved Irish coast and remained a powerful, rebellious force for the rest of her days. You lie back in your hammock, the soft sounds of the sea serpent all around you, and picture this fierce Irish woman. A commander, a mother, a diplomat, a queen. She was a pirate, yes, but she was also a symbol of an older world, a leader who fought to protect her people's traditions against the crushing march of an empire. The sea, you are learning, has always made a space for those who refuse to bend. The quiet days of storytelling are over. Finch, the navigator, has confirmed your position near active shipping lanes, and a new energy thrums through the sea serpent. The mood shifts from the lethargy of a long voyage to the focused preparation for a hunt. The quartermaster's order rings out across the deck. Weapons drill and maintenance. It is time for you to become personally and professionally acquainted with the tools that define your new trade. First, you are handed a cutlass. It is heavier than you expect, a brutish, practical piece of steel. This is not the elegant, slender rapier of a nobleman. The blade is short, wide, and slightly curved. Designed not for delicate fencing, but for powerful, cleaving strokes in the tight, chaotic confines of a ship's deck. The hilt is a simple basket of iron, meant to protect your knuckles from being smashed. The boatswain puts you and the other newer recruits through a series of drills. There is no fancy footwork, no elaborate parrying. You learn a few basic, effective cuts and a simple block. The lesson is clear. The cutlass is a simple tool for a simple job. It doesn't misfire or run out of ammunition. It is, you reflect, a remarkably reliable piece of equipment. Next, you move on to firearms. You are shown the workings of the flintlock pistol. It is a beautiful object with its polished wood stock and elegant brass fittings, but its beauty hides a clumsy and frustrating temperament. You learn the slow multi-step ritual of loading it, pouring a measure of black powder down the barrel, followed by a lead ball wrapped in a small patch of cloth, and ramming it all down tightly. Then a pinch of finer powder must be placed in the flashpan. You practice firing at a barrel tossed overboard. The result is a loud crack, a satisfying cloud of grey smoke, and, more often than not, a splash in the water nowhere near the target. Its accuracy, you surmise, is mostly a matter of wishful thinking. You now understand why the most fearsome pirates carry a whole brace of them, pre-loaded in a sash. In a real fight, a flintlock pistol is a single-use weapon, good for one loud, intimidating shot before it becomes a poorly balanced club. Finally, you're assigned to a cannon crew. You are now part of the team that operates the ship's great guns, the true source of its power. You're assigned to the number 3 gun on the port side, a massive tube of black iron resting on a heavy wooden carriage. You learn that firing a cannon is a slow, dangerous and intricate ballet that requires a team of at least 6 men, each with a specific role. There is the sponger, who swabs the hot barrel with a wet sheepskin sponge to extinguish any lingering embers. Then the loader, who places the cartridge of powder and the heavy iron cannonball into the muzzle. Another man rams it all home. The gun captain, the only true expert, is responsible for aiming, making tiny adjustments to the gun's elevation. When he is satisfied, he gives the order, and the last man touches a slow-burning match to the touch hole. The result is a deafening, earth-shaking boom that vibrates through the entire ship. It is, you decide, a very loud and very dangerous form of teamwork. As you stand back from the smoking cannon, your ears ringing, you reflect on all this deadly potential. And yet, during the capture of the Spanish ship, you never drew your cutlass. The cannons fired only a single, harmless warning shot. This is when the great debate about pirate warfare becomes real to you. Historians argue whether a pirate's greatest weapon was his cannon or his reputation. You realise now that the two are inseparable. Your job is not necessarily to fight, but to be ready to fight. The drills, the maintenance, the sheer spectacle of your ship's firepower. It is all part of a grand and terrifying performance, designed to make your enemy surrender before the real violence even has a chance to begin. The true art of your trade is to sell the promise of violence so effectively that you rarely have to deliver. After weeks of quiet sailing, the familiar cry of "sail ho" from the crow's nest feels like a welcome interruption. A lone ship is on the horizon, a large, heavy-looking merchantman, according to the officers with their spyglasses. The mood on the Sea Serpent is buoyant, confident. The last prize was an easy one, and the crew is flush with the memory of fresh food and Spanish wine. Perhaps this is another stroke of good fortune. The ship feels alive again as everyone moves to their stations, a quiet hum of professional anticipation in the air. You take your place, your hand resting on the familiar hilt of your cutlass. The Sea Serpent is fast and agile, and you close the distance easily. The plan is the same as before, getting close under a friendly flag, run up the Jolly Roger at the last moment, fire a warning shot and watch them surrender. But as you draw nearer, a subtle sense of unease begins to creep in. Finch, the navigator, squints at the vessel through his spyglass, a frown creasing his brow. The other ship is too neat. Her sails are perfectly white and expertly trimmed. Her lines are sharp. She sails with a confidence that feels out of place for a simple merchant vessel. Just as your captain raises his hand to give the signal to hoist the black flag, the trap springs with horrifying speed. Along the side of the other ship, a long row of what you thought were painted planks falls away on hidden hinges, revealing a perfect, unbroken line of cannon ports. And from each port, the black mouth of a cannon is already run out, aimed directly at your heart. It's a Royal Navy frigate, a wolf that has patiently allowed the lamb to approach. Before a single order can be shouted on your deck, the world dissolves into a storm of noise and violence. The frigate disappears behind a solid wall of thick white smoke, and a sound unlike anything you have ever experienced. Not a series of booms, but one continuous deafening roar washes over you. It feels less like a sound and more like a physical blow. The Sea Serpent lurches violently as if struck by the hand of a god. The air fills with the sharp crack of splintering wood. The mainmast groans, shudders, and then snaps with a sound like the sky ripping in two. Men are screaming. It is all over in an instant. Your crew, stunned and reeling, tries to mount a defence. Your cannon team manages to get off a single defiant shot, but it's a pathetic, lonely sound answered by another disciplined, devastating volley from the frigate. Smoke chokes the air, and through the haze you see the warship manoeuvring with a speed and precision you could never match. Historians debate why so many pirate crews were ultimately captured. Was it arrogance, a breakdown in discipline, or simply the mathematical inevitability of facing a superior power? Today, it feels like inevitability. All your practice with swords and pistols feels like a child's game in the face of this professional, overwhelming force. The frigate pulls alongside, and this time the boarding action is in reverse. Red-coated Royal Marines, their bayonets gleaming, swarm over the rails. They move in disciplined lines, a stark contrast to the individual, chaotic fighting style of your crew. The fight on deck is a short, brutal and utterly one-sided affair. You see men you've shared meals with, men who told you tall tales in the night, cut down in moments. The captain, seeing the absolute hopelessness of the situation, screams the order to strike the colours. The Jolly Roger, your symbol of freedom and terror, is lowered for the last time. "Drop your weapons!" a naval officer bellows, his voice cutting through the din. You look down at the cutlass in your hand, the tool you are just beginning to master, and you let it fall to the deck with a clatter. You and the other survivors are kicked to your knees, your hands bound painfully behind your backs. You look around at the wreckage of your ship, at the defeated, bloodied faces of your crewmates. The grand adventure has ended. You are no longer a pirate. You are a prisoner of the crown. The moments following your capture are a blur of rough hands, shouted orders, and the grim reality of iron shackles. You and the other survivors are herded from the ruined deck of the Sea Serpent onto the pristine, orderly frigate. You are shoved down into the brig, a dark, foul-smelling space in the belly of the ship, already crowded with your crewmates. The journey to Port Royal, Jamaica takes weeks, and it is a miserable passage. The food, you note with a grim irony, is just as bad as it was on your own ship, but the general mood is considerably worse. There are no sea shanties here, only the clinking of chains and the heavy silence of despair. When you finally make port, you're hauled onto the deck, blinking in the painfully bright Caribbean sun. You're paraded through the streets of the bustling town, a spectacle for the gawking crowds who jeer and throw refuse at the captured pirates. You're brought to the town jail, a squat stone building that smells of sickness and fear, and thrown into a communal cell to await your trial. The day comes all too soon. You are shackled to your crewmates and marched through the town once more, this time to the courthouse. The room is large and airy, but it feels suffocating. There is no jury of your peers. Instead, a panel of 7 men, naval officers, wealthy merchants, and colonial administrators, sit at a high bench, looking down at you with stern, impassive faces. On a table before them rests a large ceremonial oar made of solid silver, a symbol of the Admiralty's power over the sea and, by extension, over you. You are shoved into the defendant's dock. The air is thick with the scent of unwashed bodies and expensive perfume. A clerk stands and reads the indictment in a droning, monotonous voice, accusing you by your new name, Jack, and all the others, of piracy, felony, and robbery upon the high seas. It is a long and repetitive document, but its meaning is simple. You are, in theory, innocent until proven guilty, but you look at the faces of the judges and feel they are very, very confident they can prove it. The trial itself is a swift, efficient affair. The captain of the naval frigate gives his testimony, a crisp and professional account of your capture. The captain of the Spanish merchant ship you plundered is called to testify against you. Your ship's articles, with your own signature in the book, are presented as evidence. The captured Jolly Roger is unceremoniously displayed for the court. It all feels less like a search for truth and more like a carefully staged play, and everyone has already read the final act. Historians debate the legitimacy of these Vice Admiralty trials. Were they fair instruments of justice, or were they effectively show trials designed to make a swift and brutal example of pirates to deter others? Standing in the dock, you have your answer. When you're finally asked if you have anything to say in your defence, a few of your crewmates try to argue they were forced into the life, but their pleas are dismissed. What can you say? You're young, but you are a willing participant. Your silence is taken as an admission of guilt. The judges confer for no more than 5 minutes, their wigs bobbing as they whisper amongst themselves. The lead judge, a portly man with a face like sour milk, stands to deliver the verdict. On the charge of piracy, this court finds you guilty. The word doesn't land with a crash, it lands with a soft, heavy thud in the hot, silent room. Then comes the final piece of theatre. The judge solemnly places a square of black cloth upon his head. He looks down at you and your crewmates, and he pronounces the sentence. The judgment of this court is that you shall be taken from hence to the place from whence you came, and from thence to the place of execution, and that there you shall be, each of you, hanged by the neck until you are dead. And may the Lord have mercy upon your souls, You are grabbed by the guards and hauled out of the courtroom, the formal, bureaucratic words of your own death sentence echoing in your ears. The legal process is complete. You are no longer just a prisoner, you are condemned. The days in the prison at Port Royal bleed into one another, a monotonous cycle of fear and waiting. The sun rises and sets outside your small barred window, but in the stale, damp air of the cell, time has no meaning. There is only the before and the ever-dwindling after. You are among your crewmates, all of you sharing the same grim fate. In a quiet corner you see Silas, the old storyteller. His face is calm, resigned. You find yourself needing to know the end of his tale, needing to know how others faced this same final judgment. You sit beside him on the filthy straw and ask, "Silas, tell me the rest. Tell me about their trial." He looks at you, his eyes full of a deep, weary sorrow, and he nods. "The men," he begins, his voice low and steady, "were dispatched quickly. Calico Jack and his crew were hanged within the week. Their bodies were dipped in tar and hung in cages at the entrance to the harbour, a gruesome welcome for any other pirates who might try their luck." He tells you that Anne Bonny was granted permission to see Jack one last time before his execution, but she offered no words of comfort or of love. Her last words to him were as cold and hard as a cannonball. "Had you fought like a man," she said, "you need not have been hanged like a dog." About 10 days later, Anne and Mary were brought to trial. The courtroom was even more crowded than it was for your own. This was a spectacle. The infamous she-pirates, the scourge of the Caribbean, were finally being brought to justice. At first, Mary was still presented to the court as Mark Reed, but the pretense was quickly dropped. The trial was not about their gender. It was about their crimes. The testimony against them was damning. A captive named Dorothy Thomas was called as a key witness. Silas seems to recall her words as if he'd been there himself. She testified that the two women wore men's clothes, that they were always armed with pistols and machetes, and that she knew them to be pirates. She told the court that when the pirates' vessel was in a fight, Anne and Mary were more active and ruthless than any of the men, shouting orders, firing their weapons, and cursing their crewmates for not fighting hard enough. Other witnesses confirmed her account, each one painting a picture of two women who were not just participants, but instigators and leaders. Listening to this, you reflect on your own brief time as a pirate. You remember the need to prove yourself, to seem tougher than you were, to earn your place in that brutal world. Historians debate whether their legendary fierceness was an inherent part of their character, or a calculated performance necessary to command respect and maintain their authority. Were they naturally more violent, or did they simply have more to prove? You suspect with a certainty that chills you to the bone that it was both. There was no defence they could offer. The evidence was absolute. The judges of the court, just as they did with you, conferred for only a few moments. The verdict was inevitable. Guilty. The head judge once again put on his black cap. He looked at the two women standing defiant in the dock and he sentenced them to hang. And now Silas's voice grows even quieter, bringing the story to its final dramatic moment. The judge asked the customary question, was there any reason the sentence should not be carried out? The courtroom fell silent, expecting the end. This was the moment. Anne and Mary, having seen their captain and crewmates sent to the gallows, played their last impossible card. One after the other, they stood and declared to the court that they could not be executed. They pleaded the belly. Silas falls silent. You sit together in the gloom of your own prison cell, condemned men listening to a story of the condemned. Anne and Mary faced the same judges, the same sentence, the same final walk to the gallows as you now face. But they held one final secret, a spark of life that the law, for all its power and its fury, was forced to respect. Their fight was over, their guilt was certain, but their story, you realise, was not quite finished. The question hangs in the dark, heavy air of the prison cell, a tiny flicker of hope in an ocean of despair. So what happened to them, Silas? Did they get away? You lean forward, needing the story to end with something other than the gallows you now face. Silas is quiet for a long moment, and when he speaks, his voice is softer than ever. For Mary Red, he begins, the story ends in this same squalor. Her plea saved her from the noose, but it could not save her from the jail. The records show she contracted a violent fever shortly after the trial, likely a complication from giving birth in these wretched conditions. She was a survivor her whole life. She survived a childhood of deception. She survived the battlefields of Flanders. She survived as a man among pirates, but in the end, it was the filth of a prison that claimed her. Her child's fate, like so many details of her life, was never recorded. She was buried in the churchyard in Spanish Town, her improbable, difficult life ending in a quiet, anonymous grave. But Anne Bonny, he continues, a note of mystery entering his voice, now that is another story entirely. Mary Red has an ending. Anne Bonny has a legend. She simply vanished. He explains that after her execution was stayed, the historical record falls completely silent. There is no account of her being hanged. There is no record of her death in prison. There is no official document detailing her release. She walked out of the courtroom and into pure, frustrating mystery. For 200 years, Silas says, sailors and storytellers have tried to fill in that blank page. There are dozens of theories. He tells you the most likely one, the one the old hands believe. He reminds you of her father, William Cormac, the wealthy and influential lawyer who had become a Carolina plantation owner. He had disowned Anne for marrying a worthless sailor. But a father's heart, Silas suggests, is a complex thing. The theory holds that Cormac, unable to bear the thought of his daughter's execution, no matter her crimes, used his considerable fortune and his legal connections to intervene. He would have sailed to Jamaica, not with a sword, but with a ledger book and a chest full of gold. A quiet negotiation, a hefty bribe to the right officials, and one night, Anne Bonny would have been spirited from her cell, placed on a fast, unmarked ship and taken back to Charlestown. In this version of the story, she did not return to piracy. She was given a new name, a new identity. She married a respectable man, had more children, and lived out the rest of her long life as a proper Carolina lady. Her pirate past, with its violence and its passion and its famous red hair, was buried so deep it was as if it never happened. She became a ghost in her own lifetime. There are other, more romantic tales, of course. That old pirate companion stormed the jail and rescued her. That she escaped on her own and made her way to Louisiana, marrying again and living a quiet life. But these are just tavern stories, spun from wishful thinking. The great unsolved mystery remains. And maybe, Silas says, his voice a near whisper, that is the most fitting end for her. The authorities, for all their power, never got to write her final chapter. She denied them the satisfaction of her death one way or another. Mary Red, who lived her life as a secret, has a known public end. Anne Bonny, who lived her life so loudly and publicly, has a secret end. You sit in the oppressive darkness, the certainty of your own fate a heavy weight in your gut. You will have no mystery. Your end will be public and brutal. But you think of Anne Bonny, the fiery pirate queen who somehow, against all odds, escaped her own ending and simply dissolved back into the world, leaving nothing behind but a story and a question. In the final quiet days in the prison cell, time seems to slow down and stretch out, becoming as vast and empty as the ocean you once sailed. The fear has subsided into a dull, heavy resignation. It is in this strange calm that you turn to Silas, the old storyteller who shares your condemnation. Why us, Silas, you ask? Were we just unlucky? Silas looks at you, not with pity, but with the weary wisdom of a man who has seen the end of his own world. Luck has little to do with it, lad, he says softly. We weren't just captured. We were made obsolete. Our time was already over. We just didn't know it. He explains that your fate was not an isolated incident, but the final act in a long and deliberate war against the very idea of piracy. The Golden Age, that brief, chaotic period of freedom and plunder, was being systematically dismantled piece by piece. First, he says, they took away our homes. He tells you of the closing of the great pirate havens. He speaks of Port Royal, his voice full of a strange reverence, a city so rich and wicked it was called the Sodom of the New World, before an earthquake in 1692 simply swallowed it into the sea, a sign some took as a divine judgment. More recently, he tells you of the end of Nassau, the pirate republic. For years it was a lawless paradise where men like Blackbeard and Calico Jack ruled. Then one day the former privateer Woodes Rogers sailed into the harbour, not with a single ship, but with a fleet of Royal Navy warships. He brought with him the king's pardon for all who would surrender their trade, and a noose for all who would not. The party, Silas says, was over. The pirate's nest was gone. There was no safe place to return to, no friendly port to sell your goods or spend your coin. Then, he continues, they built better hunters. He reminds you of the frigate that captured you, its speed, its discipline, its overwhelming firepower. For decades, the navies of the world were too busy fighting each other to be bothered with a few pirates. But after the Great Wars in Europe ended, the kings and merchants decided that piracy was bad for business. They built faster ships, trained professional soldiers, and sent dedicated pirate hunters to patrol the shipping lanes. The odds of the game changed. Piracy went from being a risky but profitable venture to a near-certain death sentence. And for those who saw the writing on the wall, the authorities offered a golden bridge out of the life, the king's pardon. Silas explains how tempting that offer was to a man who was tired of sleeping in a damp hammock, tired of eating weevils, tired of the constant fear. The promise of a clean slate, a chance to return home without a noose around your neck, was a weapon more powerful than any cannon. It sowed dissent among crews and bled the pirate ranks from within, as veteran sailors simply gave up the life and walked away. Silas looks at the stone wall of your cell, as if seeing these historical forces moving across it. Historians will debate the fatal blow, he muses. Was it the warships that outgunned us? The pardons that weakened us? Or the simple fact that the world was running out of blank spaces on the map? He concludes it was all three. The safe harbours closed, the hunters grew stronger, and the promise of forgiveness lured away the weary. It was a perfect storm that their way of life could not survive. You sit together in the silence, the weight of his words settling upon you. You are not just a common criminal awaiting execution. You are an anachronism, a relic of a wilder time that is now being tamed. The world has become too organised, the seas too policed. The great lawless frontier is being fenced in, and you were simply born on the wrong side of that fence. The Golden Age is over, and you are to be one of its last quiet casualties. It is the last night. The air in the cell is heavy and still, thick with unspoken fears. You can hear the distant sounds of the city settling into sleep, sounds that feel like they belong to another world, a world you are no longer a part of. You look over at Silas, whose calm has been a small steady anchor in these final terrifying days. Will anyone remember us? You ask, the words barely a whisper. Will anyone know we were even here? Silas is quiet for a long time, looking at the sliver of moon visible through the high barred window. No, lad, Hiki says, his voice gentle. Not us, men like you and me. We are footnotes at best. Our names are forgotten, our bodies are hung up to scare the next generation, and then we are gone. We are the grim reality of piracy, and reality is seldom a pleasant thing to remember. But the women, he says, a different tone entering his voice. Anne, Mary, Grace, Ching-Shi. Their stories are different. Their stories will survive. He explains that their tales are too strange, too sensational to be forgotten. He tells you that writers in London are already gathering these stories, printing them in books that people will buy and read in their comfortable drawing rooms. They will take the ugly, brutal truth of this life, the hunger, the filth, the constant gnawing fear you have come to know so well, and they will sand it down, polishing it until it gleams. They won't tell the truth of it, Silas murmurs. They won't write about the weevils and the biscuits, or the agony of a fever in a damp pitching hammock. They will forget the monotony, the grime and the despair. Instead, they will write of adventure, of rebellion, of freedom. He explains that the desperate acts of survival these women committed will be transformed into grand gestures of defiance. Mary Read's lifetime of hiding will become a thrilling masquerade. Anne Bonny's fury will become the righteous fire of a revolutionary. Ching-Shi's brutal regime will be remembered as a glorious, exotic empire. This, he tells you, is the strange, final magic of it all. The legacy of piracy isn't the reality, it's the myth. And the women, because they were so rare and so remarkable, will become the brightest stars in that myth. They will be transformed from desperate, violent and complex human beings into symbols. They will represent a dream of a life without rules, a fantasy of absolute freedom on the open sea. And that dream, he says, is a far more powerful and enduring thing than the short, brutal lives they actually lived. So no, he says, turning to look at you in the darkness. They won't remember us, but they will remember them. They will sing their songs and tell their stories for hundreds of years. The empires that hunted them will be remembered in dry history books, but the pirate queens will live forever in the minds of dreamers. And in a way, that is a kind of victory, isn't it? He falls silent then, and you sit together, two condemned men on the edge of oblivion, contemplating the strange immortality of a good story. And so our own story comes to a gentle close. The voice of old Silas begins to fade, becoming just another whisper in the long night, his tales dissolving like sea mist in the morning sun. The hard stone walls of the prison cell soften and blur, the weight of the chains and the fear of the gallows all beginning to drift away now, their purpose served. The journey is over. There are no more storms to weather, no more battles to be fought, no more mysteries to be solved. There is only the quiet, steady rhythm of your own breathing, a gentle tide rising and falling in the stillness of your room. Let the characters and their struggles go. Release the tension from your shoulders, from your hands, from your brow. They have found their own strange peace, and now you can find yours. Feel the gentle, heavy pull of sleep, a welcome and trusted friend waiting to carry you away from the shore of wakefulness and out into the deep, calm and silent waters of your own dreams. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to think about. All that remains is this easy, quiet descent into rest. The ship is safely at anchor. The watch is over. You can rest now. Just rest.